The tray was still warm when Wren Calloway carried it down the one corridor. The whole ward had agreed to pretend was not there. Cyril watched her go. He watched from behind the nurse's rail, where the rest of the day's shift had bunched together the way small animals bunch when a shadow crosses the ceiling. 6 of them, pressed shoulder to shoulder, and not one willing to be the person nearest the far door. That was the geometry of Recovery Ward 6 now. Everything in it had rearranged itself around the fact of Bay 9. The human did not rearrange. She walked the center line of the corridor with a metal tray balanced on one flat hand, the way she carried broth to the post-surgical patients, and she was humming. Cyril's translation film could not do anything with a hum. It sat in his ear and offered him nothing, which was somehow worse than words. "She is going to feed it," said Aide beside him. Aide's skin had gone the pale, curdled blue of an Asheni who wanted very much to be somewhere else. Overseer Praxa gave a direct order, no rations to Bay 9. She signed it herself. "I was there when she signed it," Cyril said. "Then why is the human carrying a tray to Bay 9? Cyril did not have an answer, so he did what Asheni do with an unanswerable thing. He filed it. He watched Wren Calloway reach the far door, set her palm against the reader, and wait while the lock cycled through its 3 warning tones. The tones existed to give a person time to reconsider. Everyone reconsidered. The station's own maintenance crews had stopped coming to this end of the ward. They routed the air scrubbers by hand from the junction rather than past the door. Wren did not reconsider. The door opened. She stepped through into the short gray airlock, and the outer door sealed behind her, and for a moment the 6 of them at the rail could see her only as a smeared shape through the observation slit, standing very still in the space between the 2 doors while the inner door thought about whether to let her live. Then the inner door opened, and she was gone into Bay 9, and Aide made a sound like a kettle taken off a flame too slowly. "She is inside," he said. "Yes," Cyril said. "With it?" "Yes." He should have logged that too, the way procedure demanded. Unauthorized personnel in a Class 9 containment bay. He had the pad in his hand. He did not touch it. He found, standing at the rail with his skin trying to decide what color to be, that he did not want to be the reason the humming stopped. The thing in Bay 9 had a designation and a case number, and a species classification that ran to 9 characters, and no one in Recovery Ward 6 used any of them. They called it the specimen when they had to write it down. They called it that thing when they did not. It had come to them 4 months ago on a military hospital transport, half dead, with a Legion tag burned into the hide behind its left foreleg and a surgical manifest longer than Cyril's arm. "Border Legion War Beast," the manifest said, "Sable Class. Recovered from a debris field after the beast's handler and the beast's transport, and the beast's entire unit had failed to recover from the same debris field. It had come to them because the coalition did not, as a rule, destroy an asset that had cost that much to raise, and because someone 3 tiers up had signed a form that said convalesce and return to service. It had convalesced. That was the trouble. Under the ward's care, the thing had knit its shattered shoulder, regrown the burned patch of hide, put back on the 80 kilos of muscle it had lost, and become, in the professional judgment of every handler the Legion sent, unreturnable to service. It would not answer to the control collar. It would not answer to the shock lattice. It would not answer to the 6 increasingly senior beastmasters who had come in sequence to reassert the chain of command. A war beast is bred to feel in its spine. It had simply looked at each of them out of eyes like wet slate coins, and waited, and one by one they had left the bay with their instruments and their dignity in disarray, and reported the same word up the line. Rogue. Cyril had read the word on 6 separate reports. He had read the incident file that sat under all of them, the one everyone in the ward had read and no one discussed, the one that ended with a staff hand named Dissin and a corridor that had to be resurfaced. He had read the recommendation stapled to the incident file. Terminate. and he had watched, over 4 months, the only creature on Cassiar Reach who treated any of it as ordinary carry broth and warm bricks, and a hand broom into that bay twice a day and come out again, humming, with an empty tray. The inner door cycled. Wren came back through the airlock, tray under her arm now, and crossed to the nurse's station, wiping her hands on the front of her scrubs. She was small even for a human, which made her small by any standard the ward kept. Plain brown hair pulled back so hard it looked painful, a face you would forget in a transit queue. She had a smear of something dark along one wrist that Cyril chose, firmly, not to identify. "Morning," she said to the 6 of them at the rail. None of them answered. She did not seem to mind. She never seemed to mind. "Aide Calloway," that was Aide gathering himself. "The overseer's order, rations to Bay 9 are suspended, effective yesterday." "I know," she racked the tray. "I read it." "Then—" "That was the ward's food," Wren said without heat. "This is mine." She said it the way a person states the weather, and then she went to her desk. Her desk was the aid station at the mouth of the long ward, a battered coalition-issue console with a chair that did not fit any human and a footwell she kept curtained with a strip of thermal cloth. She sat. She pulled the cloth aside, and under the desk, in the footwell where her knees should have gone, was an insulated field cooler the size of a supply crate, and it was full, and Cyril understood 2 things at once. The first was where the meat from the ward's own cold stores had been going, the small, unaccountable losses the quartermaster had been raising at every shift meeting for a month. The second was that she was paying for the rest of it herself, out of a station aide's wage, from the concourse butcher's 4 tiers down, and carrying it up in her own arms, and hiding it under her desk, and feeding by hand a thing the Legion had condemned to death. He filed that too. He was getting a very full file. "She'll be dismissed," Aide whispered. "If Praxa sees the cooler, she'll be dismissed and fined and probably charged, and for what? For that thing. It killed this sin. It'll kill her." Cyril looked at the human at her desk, tucking the thermal cloth back over the footwell, and he thought about the fact that in 4 months the thing in Bay 9 had killed exactly 1 person, and that person had been carrying a blade the length of Cyril's forearm, and that no one had ever asked why a staff hand needed a blade like that in a recovery ward. He thought about how the incident file did not mention the blade at all. "Maybe," he said. He did not say the rest of it. The rest of it he was not ready to say out loud in a corridor with his skin the wrong color and the overseer 2 doors down. The order came at midday. It came the way all of Praxa's orders came, as a soft chime on every pad in the ward and a summons to the observation gallery over Bay 9. And Cyril went because he was rostered to go, and because a part of him that he did not like wanted to see what the woman would do. The gallery was a long window of armored glass set into the wall above the bay, angled down, so that the staff could watch the specimen without being in the room with it. Below, through the glass, the bay was bright. That was the one mercy of Cassiar Reach's convalescent tears. They were built for healing, and the Coalition's physicians held as doctrine that things healed better in light, so even the containment bays were lit like noon. Broad daylight panels in the ceiling threw a clean white glow across the poured floor, and in the middle of that light, the thing from Bay 9 lay in the exact center of the room with its head on its forepaws, unbothered, enormous, the size of a draft animal and shaped like nothing that had ever pulled a plow. Slate hide, a back ridged with old muscle, and even lying down, even at rest, a stillness that made every Asheny in the gallery stand a little further back from the glass than the glass required. Overseer Praxa stood at the rail with her hands folded. She was Corvine, squat and gray and unhurried, and she had run the convalescent tears of Cassiar Reach for 30 years without once, to Cyril's knowledge, raising her voice because she had never needed to. "The Legion has released the asset to us for disposition," she said, "which is a courtesy. They could have handled it themselves. They chose not to spend the personnel." She let that sit, because everyone in the room understood what it meant that 6 beast masters had gone into that bay, and the Legion had decided a 7th was not worth the risk. A reclamation specialist arrives on the morning shuttle. He will assess the specimen for return to service one final time. If he cannot reclaim it, he will remove it. Either outcome ends with Bay 9 empty by the end of the week. I want the ward to understand that this is not a discussion. It is a schedule. Nobody argued. Asheny did not argue with schedules. Cyril looked down through the glass at the thing in the light and found that it had lifted its head and was looking, not at the gallery full of staff, not at the overseer, but at the small gray door at the corner of the bay through which broth and warm bricks arrived twice a day. It watched the door. It was waiting for the door. Overseer. The voice was flat and clear, and it came from the back of the gallery, and every head turned because no one interrupted Praxa. Wren Calloway stood by the door with a data slate held against her chest. Removal to where? Praxa considered her. That is a Legion matter, Aide. It's a ward asset in a ward bay, Wren said, which makes its disposition a ward record, and the record has to say where. So, removal to where? A ripple went through the Asheny along the rail, a flush of alarmed color, blue and gray. Aide actually took a step away from the human as if proximity were catching. Cyril watched Praxa's flat gray face and could not read it, which was the point of a face like Praxa's. The specimen will be transferred to a Legion disposal facility on the outer ring, the overseer said, where it will be humanely destroyed. That is the record, Aide Calloway, and you may enter it as such. Thank you, Wren said, as if she had been given a shift change, and she entered something on her slate, and that was the whole of it. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue the schedule. Cyril would think about that later, how she had not argued, how she had only wanted it written down where everyone could see it, as if she were building a document, as if, even then, she already knew she was going to need one. The reclamation specialist arrived the next morning, and his name was Vas Karam, and he was the most confident living thing Cyril had ever stood next to. He came off the shuttle with 2 attendants and a wheeled case of instruments, and the particular ease of a person who had been the most dangerous thing in every room he had ever entered. Keaton, by his build and his crest and the old scarwork laddered up both forearms. A warrior caste people who bred war beasts the way the Asheny bred medicines, patiently and for centuries. He wore working leathers, not armor, which Cyril understood was itself a statement. Armor said, I am afraid of the animal. Leathers said the animal should be afraid of me. Recovery Ward 6, he said, reading the sign, and smiled with a great many teeth. They put a Legion sable in a hospital. No wonder it forgot itself. An animal is a mirror, overseer. Kept soft, it goes soft, and then it goes wrong. You cannot heal the Legion out of a thing like this. You can only remind it. Then remind it, Praxa said, by the end of the week. Karam laughed, a short, warm bark, and looked around the gathered staff with frank good humor, and his gaze crossed Wren where she stood at her desk and slid off her without stopping, the way it slid off the wall, the chairs, the medical carts. She was furniture to him. Cyril saw her register that and put it away somewhere, unhurried, the same place she put everything. Who feeds it? Karam said. The question dropped into the ward and made a silence. Feeding has been suspended, Praxa said. By my order, 9 days. Karam's crest shifted. 9 days without food, and it lay in the center of the bay this morning with a full coat and clear eyes. He was still smiling, but the smile had changed shape. I watched the gallery feed on the transit up. That is not a 9-day starved animal, overseer. That is an animal someone is feeding. Nobody looked at Wren. That was the mistake, Cyril thought afterward. In a ward full of Asheny whose skin broadcast every feeling they had, the surest way to point at a thing was for all of them to carefully not look at it. Karam was a man who had spent his life reading exactly that kind of tell in exactly that kind of animal. He turned, slow and pleased, and looked at the one person at the rail who had not gone pale, the small plain human at the battered desk with a strip of thermal cloth curtaining her footwell, and he smiled his enormous smile at her, and he said, "You." Ren looked back at him. She did not stand up straighter. She did not go pale. She set down the manifest she had been reading and she said, "Me what?" "You feed it." Karam crossed the ward toward her desk, unhurried, and the staff peeled out of his path. "Do not trouble to deny it. I have handled Sable class my whole life. That animal has been hand-fed by someone it tolerates recently and often, and there is only one person in this ward standing between me and that footwell you are so carefully not looking at." He stopped over her, and he was very tall and she was very small, and the difference did not appear to interest her at all. "Show me." Ren pulled the thermal cloth aside. The cooler sat there in the footwell, humming faintly, and Karam crouched and put back the lid and looked at what was inside. The neat stacked packets of rendered muscle and organ, portioned and dated in a small, careful hand, and something moved across his scarred face that Cyril could not name until later, when he had more of the story, and understood that it had been the first crack in the man's certainty. Because this was not the cache of a sentimental girl who had made a pet of a monster. This was a feeding regimen, portioned by mass, rotated by organ, dated. Somebody had worked out to the gram what a Border Legion Sable needed to stay strong on, and had been meeting that number out of her own wage for months. "You built a diet," Karam said. "It wasn't eating the ward feed," Ren said. "The blend's wrong for a Legion breed. Too much filler, not enough organ, and they were leaving it in the trough and writing down that the specimen refused food, which the file then called stress behavior, which then went in the reports that got it called rogue." She said all of this in the same flat, unhurried voice, and Cyril realized she had been carrying it, fully assembled, for a long time, waiting for one person in a position of authority to hold still long enough to hear it. "It wasn't refusing food. It was refusing your food, so I made it food it would eat. That's all this is." "That is not all this is." Karam stood. The good humor had drained out of him and left something harder and more honest underneath. "You have been going into the bay. Twice a day. Alone, without a lattice, without a collar, without a single one of the controls the Legion breeds into these animals across 40 generations." He was not smiling now at all. "Do you understand what you are to that thing? You are prey that stopped running. That is the only category it has for you. Sooner or later the breeding wins. It always wins. And on that day there will not be enough of you left to find." "It's had 114 days, Ren said. "To do that, it hasn't." "It is waiting." That's what everyone keeps saying. For the first time something flickered under the flatness, not fear, something closer to tiredness. "For 114 days everyone in this ward has told me that thing is waiting to kill me. And every one of those days I've knelt down next to it and cleaned the wound on its shoulder that your Legion's collar left, the one that keeps reopening because it won't stop testing the scar, and it has held still and let me. If it's waiting, it's the patientest killer in the coalition. At some point a thing that keeps not killing you is just a thing that isn't going to." "Enough," Prax's voice from the gallery door. She had come down. She stood at the mouth of the long ward with her hands folded and her flat gray gaze moving from the human to the specialist to the open cooler in the footwell, and she took all of it in without a flicker. "Aide Calloway, you are in violation of a standing order and a containment protocol, and if either the specialist or I chose to press it, you would leave Casker Reach on the next shuttle. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Overseer." "Do you intend to stop?" The ward held still. Cyril found he had stopped breathing, which was a thing Asheni could do for a surprisingly long time and which they did, involuntarily, when a thing mattered. "No," Ren said. Praxa looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Cyril did not expect, something he turned over in his mind for days afterward. She unfolded her hands. "The specialist has until the end of the week," the Overseer said. "Feed the animal or don't. It changes nothing about the schedule. It only changes whether the specialist is trying to reclaim a strong animal or a weak one, and a weak one is more likely to be destroyed than returned. So by feeding it you are, in your way, arguing for its life against your own interest, which I note without admiring." She turned to go and paused. "The cooler comes out of the footwell. Put it in the cold store under your own seal. If you are going to break my order, Aide, you will at least break it hygienically." And she left. It was, Cyril understood, as close to permission as a Corvine overseer would ever come, and he did not think Karam understood it at all. The specialist was staring after Praxa with his crest low and flat, a man who had come to a soft hospital ward to remind a soft animal of the hard world, and had instead been handed a diet chart, and a schedule, and a human who would not run. "Tomorrow," Karam said to no one to the ward, "tomorrow I go into the bay, and we will all see what it has been waiting for." He went into the bay at the start of second shift, and Cyril watched from the gallery with the rest of the ward, and it went wrong in a way that was worse than violence, because there was no violence in it at all. Karam went in the way his caste went in, without armor, without a weapon in his hands, trailing the long braided cord of a Legion control lattice from one fist. Cyril had read about the lattice. It did not shock exactly. It broadcast, on a band bred war beasts felt in the bone, a signal that said pack and above you and heal, a signal 40 generations of Legion breeding had wired a sable to obey the way its heart obeyed the order to beat. No sable had ever ignored a lattice in a master's hand. That was the entire foundation of the caste. That was Karam's whole life, coiled in his fist. He walked to the center of the bright bay, and he stopped a body length from the thing, and he switched on the lattice. The specimen opened its eyes. Through the glass Cyril could not hear whatever tone the lattice made, but he could see the animal receive it, could see the great slate head come up off the forepaws, the ears orient, the whole enormous body take in the signal it had been bred across centuries to obey. This was the moment. Every Ashani in the gallery leaned toward the glass. This was where 40 generations won. The specimen looked at Karam. It held the look for a long, flat moment, the wet slate eyes steady on the specialist's face. And then, with the unhurried dignity of a thing declining an invitation it found beneath it, it laid its head back down on its forepaws and closed its eyes. Karam turned the lattice to full. Cyril saw his shoulders set with the effort of it, saw the cord go taut in his fist, saw the man pour into that signal everything his caste and his breeding and his 40 years had put in him. And the animal on the floor did not so much as flick an ear. It lay in the noon-bright light with its eyes shut, breathing slow, and it ignored the reclamation specialist of the border legions the way a mountain ignores weather. It went on for 11 minutes. Cyril timed it, because timing things was what he did when he did not know what else to do with himself. 11 minutes of a legend of his caste standing in a bright room pouring the accumulated authority of centuries into an animal that had decided he was not worth opening its eyes for. At the end of the 11th minute, Karam switched off the lattice and coiled it and walked out of the bay, and his face when he came up to the gallery was the face of a man who had just watched the floor of his life develop a crack. "It is not rogue," he said. Praxa waited. A rogue animal fights the lattice. It rages against it. That is rogue. That is a broken chain of command, and a broken chain can be reforged. That is my whole craft. Karam's voice had gone quiet and precise. That animal did not fight the lattice. You cannot fight a thing you do not acknowledge. It heard the signal that has commanded its bloodline since before my people worked stone, the signal that says I am your master, and it decided the signal was beneath its notice. He looked through the glass at the sleeping shape in the light. I have never seen a sable do that. I have never heard of a sable doing that. It has not forgotten the chain of command. It has stepped off the top of it. Meaning what? Praxa said. Meaning it does not have a master, Karam said. It has decided it does not need one, and I do not know how to reclaim an animal that has concluded it outranks me. He was silent a moment. There is only one thing in this ward it acknowledges at all. Every Ashani in the gallery, with the flawless instinct of the frightened, turned to look at the small plain human standing at the back. And this time they did not stop themselves in time, and Wren Calloway looked back at all of them with a trachea face and said nothing at all. There was a child in the long ward, and her name was Pell, and she was the reason Wren had ever gone into Bay 9 the first time. Pell was Asheny, and she was small even for a molt young Asheny, and she had come to Recovery Ward 6 with a spinal graft that would take a year to take, and a mother who worked the runs and could visit twice a season. She lived in the third bed on the left, the one by the window that showed the curve of the Ringworld and the traffic of the shuttles, and she had lived there long enough that the ward was her whole world and the staff were her whole family, and she was, in the flat clinical language of the intake file, doing poorly. Children who lie still for a year do poorly. Their bodies knit and their spirits do not. She had noticed the specimen before anyone thought to hide it from her. The gallery over Bay 9 ran along the top of the long ward's rear wall, and from Pell's bed by the window, if you were small and bored and had learned to move a mirror on a jointed arm the way a child in a bed learns every trick her few square meters allow, you could catch, in the mirror, a sliver of the bright bay and the great gray shape that lived in it. And Pell, who was afraid of the physicians and the graft frames and the long numb wrongness of her own legs, was not afraid of the monster. She was 8. The monster was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to her. "Does it have a name?" she had asked Wren months ago, the first week Wren rotated onto the long ward. "No," Wren had said, "nobody named it. They just call it the specimen." "That's a terrible name." "It's not a name at all," Wren had agreed. "It's a way of not having to think about it as a thing that's alive." Pell had considered this with the gravity children bring to the cruelties of adults. "You should name it," she said. "Then they'd have to." And Wren, who Sarah would later learn had grown up on an agricultural world, where the winters killed the careless and the livestock outweighed the people, and a girl learned early that a thing you feed is a thing you are responsible for, had gone up to the gallery that night after her shift, and looked down through the armored glass at the enormous condemned animal alone in the bright empty room, and thought about the word terminate stapled to its file, and named it. "Sunday," she told Pell the next morning. "Why Sunday?" "Where I'm from it's the day you rest," Wren said. "The day nobody makes you work." It seemed like he could use one. She started going into the bay the following week. She would tell people when they asked that she went in to manage the shoulder wound, which was true, and to correct the feeding, which was true, and she would not tell them the truer thing, which was that a child in the third bed had asked her to make the monster real, and once a thing is real you cannot leave it alone in a bright room to die. Now Wren knelt on the poured floor of Bay 9 with a cloth and a basin, and Sunday lay on his side in the noon light, and let her work the reopened scar behind his shoulder, and she talked to him the way she talked to him, low and level and about nothing. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "They're going to try again. Not the lattice, he's given up on the lattice, something new. I heard the word transfer cradle, which means a crate, which means they think they can crate you." She wrung the cloth into the basin. The water went pink. "You're going to hold still and be dull for them, aren't you? You're going to lie here and be a rock and let them run out of ideas. That's what you do. You're very good at it." Sunday breathed. Under her hand the great ribs rose and fell, slow as tide. His eye, the one she could see, was half open and fixed on the small gray feeding door, the way it always was, the patient waiting for the door look that 6 beast masters had read as menace, and that Wren had long ago read as what it was, which was hope. The animal was not waiting to kill anyone. The animal was waiting for the one part of its day that was kind. "They think you're waiting to hurt me," she told him. "Karam, the new one, he's not stupid, that's the trouble with him. He's right about almost everything and wrong about the one thing that matters, which is you." She moved to the second, older scar. The pale seemed low on his flank that the file did not explain and that she had worked out for herself over 100 quiet mornings. A blade scar. Old. Healed before he ever came to the ward. "I know what you did," she said very quietly to the animal that could not understand her and understood her completely. "I know what this sin was. I know why you did it. I'm the only one who knows, and nobody's going to believe me because I'm the aide who feeds the monster and you can't testify." She sat back on her heels. "So we're going to have to find another way to tell them. I don't know what it is yet. But we've got until the end of the week, and I'm working on it." Sunday shifted his enormous head and laid it gently, the way he laid it perhaps once a week, when the mood took him and the light was good, across the tops of her knees. The weight of it stopped the blood in her legs. She did not move. She sat in the bright bay under the eye of the gallery with the head of a Border Legion war beast in her lap, and she put her hand on the slate hide between his ears, and she stayed there until her feet went numb. Because when a thing that has been alone that long decides to rest its head on you, you do not have anywhere more important to be. Up in the gallery, Cyril watched and did not log it, and beside him Vas Karim watched too and said nothing for a long time. "You see it," Cyril said finally. He surprised himself by saying it. He was not a person who volunteered things to legends. The way it puts its head down. "I see it." Karim's voice was low. "In 40 years I have made war beasts obey me. I have made them fear me and serve me and die for me on command. I have never once had a sable put its head in my lap. That is not obedience. Obedience I understand. That," he gestured through the glass at the small human and the enormous animal, both of them still in the light, "that is something a legion cannot breed and cannot buy and does not, if I am honest, entirely approve of. It looks like affection, but it is worse than affection." He watched the animal's half-shut eye. "It is trust. That animal has decided the girl is its own, and a sable that has decided a thing is its own does not defend it the way we train them to defend a handler. It defends it the way it would defend the last of its blood. There is a difference. The trained kind you can call off. The other kind," he shook his head. "The other kind you cannot." "Is that dangerous?" Cyril asked. "To the girl, no. To anyone who threatens the girl." Karim turned from the glass. "I would not want to be that person. I would not want to be within a corridor of that person." He looked at Cyril with an expression the Ashani had no word for, a soldier's weary honesty. "The overseer wants me to crate that animal and ship it to a disposal ring. I am going to try, because I have taken the commission and my caste keeps its commissions. But you should know, Ward Tech, whatever your name is, that I do not think it can be done, and I am not sure it should be, and I have never in my life said either of those things about an animal I was sent to remove." Before the cradle, there was the drone. Karim had not wanted to use it, Cyril understood later. It offended something in his caste, the idea of sedating an animal by machine rather than by hand. But the schedule was the schedule, and the ward kept a remote sedation unit in its equipment stores for the rare violent patient, a low hovering drum with a dart arm and a dull patient intelligence. And on the day between the lattice and the cradle the ward's containment officer proposed it, and Karim, out of options and out of days, allowed it. They flew it into the bay through the feeding hatch while the animal watched, and it crossed the bright room toward the great slate shape at the deliberate, idiot pace of a machine that had been told to approach, and every Ashani in the gallery leaned to the glass, because a machine has no scent and no fear and no dignity to wound. And surely, 40 generations could be undone by a patient drum with a needle. The animal watched the drone come. It let it come. It let it come to within a body length, the same radius it had held against Karim, and then it stood, unhurried, and it did not attack the drone, because there was nothing in a drone to attack, and instead it did a thing that made the containment officer put down his controller and never pick it up again. It herded it. It moved, and the drone's dull intelligence adjusted to keep its distance, and the animal used that, walked it in a slow arc across the bay, unhurried, reading the machine's logic the way it had read Six Beast Masters, until it had walked the drone into the corner by the feeding hatch, and then it simply lay down between the drone and the rest of the room, and the drone hovered in its corner with its dart arm extended at nothing, boxed, outthought by a thing the file called an animal. And after 4 minutes, the containment officer recalled it, and it flew back out through the hatch with its charge unspent. And the officer looked at it for a long moment and said, quietly, "It played the drone. It doesn't even see us as the threat. It sees the tools we send. It's disarming us one instrument at a time, and it hasn't hurt a single thing to do it." "No," Karam agreed from the gallery, and there was something in his voice that Cyril was beginning to recognize, the sound of a professional watching his profession come apart in his hands. "It has not hurt a single thing. That is what none of you will write in your reports, because it does not fit the word you have already chosen. 6 masters, a lattice, and now a machine, and it has answered all of us the same way, which is by declining precisely, without malice, and putting the tools somewhere it cannot reach and lying back down. A rogue animal breaks its cage. This one is tidying ours." He was silent a moment. "I have one instrument left, the cradle. And I will tell you now, so that you are not surprised tomorrow, that I do not think it will work either, because the cradle is just one more tool, and this animal has decided it does not accept tools, only the girl. But I will try it, because it is my commission, and because I would like, before I fail, to be certain." The transfer cradle failed the next morning. It failed politely, which was the terrible thing. Karam's attendants wheeled the cradle to the bay door. A coffin of Legion alloy meant to hold a sedated Sable through a shuttle transit, and the ward's chief physician, a careful Asheni named Amel who had never in his life sedated anything larger than himself, prepared the compound at the dose the manifest specified for a beast of Sunday's mass, and Karam carried the loaded injector into the bright bay, and Sunday watched him come, and Sunday declined. There was no attack. Cyril had braced for an attack. The whole gallery had braced, Aide with his eyes shut, Praxa with her hands folded. There was none. As Karam closed the distance, the animal simply rose, unhurried, and moved, and kept moving. And the bay was large, and the animal was faster than a thing that size had any business being. And for 20 minutes the reclamation specialist of the Border Legions chased a Sable around a bright room and never once got within a body length of it. And the animal never once did anything but not be where the injector was. It did not bare its teeth. It did not charge. It flowed around the room like water finding the low ground, and Karam, who was proud, kept his temper for 18 of the 20 minutes, and lost it in the 19th, and at the 20th stopped, chest heaving, injector still full, and stood in the center of the room and said something in his own tongue that the translation film rendered, primly, as expression of profound professional despair. The animal from the far corner watched him with what Cyril could only describe, and did describe, in the log he was now definitely not keeping, as patience. "It is playing," Karam said afterward in the gallery, mopping his crest. He did not sound angry. He sounded, if anything, awed. "Do you understand what I am telling you? A rogue animal runs in fear or fights in rage. That animal was doing neither. It was keeping a distance. It chose a radius one body length, and it maintained that radius with perfect economy for 20 minutes and never closed it and never let me close it. That is not fear. That is not rage. That is an animal telling me, as clearly as it can without harming me, that it will not be crated and that it does not wish to hurt me over the point." He looked through the glass. "It is being courteous to me. And I have spent 2 days trying to put it in a box." "The dose was correct," Emil offered unhappily, "if we could deliver it." "You cannot deliver it," Karam said. "You cannot deliver it because it does not want the dose delivered, and it is faster and smarter than you, and it has decided the matter. There is one person in this ward who could walk up to that animal with that injector right now and empty it into its neck, and it would let her." He turned. "And she will not, because she knows what the dose is for, and she is not going to hand us the animal to kill. Are you, Aide?" Ren at the back of the gallery said, "No." "No," Karam agreed, almost gently. "No, of course not." He set the injector down on the rail. "Overseer, I am going to tell you something you will not want to hear, and then I am going to tell you what I think we do about it. The something is this. This animal cannot be reclaimed to service, and it cannot be crated for disposal, not by me, not by anyone the Legion would send, not without killing people to do it, and it is not worth the people. The Legion will not spend blood on a sable that will not serve. That is simple economics, and I will put it in my report in exactly those words. Praxa's flat gray face did not change. And the schedule? The schedule, Karam said, assumes there is a way to remove the animal that does not cost more than the animal is worth. There is not. So the schedule is wrong, and I would rather tell you that on the second day than pretend for 4 more and fail on the 6th. He paused. There is a way to end this that the overseer has not considered, because it is not in the overseer's nature to consider it, and I mean that as a compliment to a hospital. You could simply let it stay. The gallery went very quiet. It is not sick, Karam went on. It is not in pain. Now that the girl has managed its wound, the Legion left. It does not attack the staff. It has, in 114 days, harmed exactly 1 person, and I have read that file, overseer, and so, I think, have you, and neither of us has said out loud what we both noticed about it, which is that the staff hand it killed was armed with a bladed weapon that has no business in a recovery ward, and that the incident report is silent about. He let that land. The animal is calm. It is fed. It is, for reasons I do not fully understand and am not sure I want to, attached to this ward and to that child in the 3rd bed who watches it in a mirror, and to the aide who named it. You have a war beast that has decided to retire into a hospital. My professional recommendation, which will cost me standing with the Legion and which I make anyway, is that you let it. It is a Class 9 predator, Praxa said. It is, Karam agreed. So is the girl if you read her species file. So is half your patient roster. You run a recovery ward at the edge of coalition space, overseer. You are already surrounded by things that could kill you and have chosen, for the moment, not to. What is 1 more? Praxa did not answer Karam that day. Cyril understood, watching her fold her hands and leave the gallery, that she was not the last word, and that the specialist's clean soldier's logic had run headfirst into the thing that actually governed Kasker Reach, which was not danger and was not mercy, but was liability. The last word arrived on the 3rd morning wearing a compliance officer's sash, and its name was Auditor Vunt, and it had come up from the Ring's central administration to close a file. Vunt was a Corvin like Praxa, but where 30 years of ward work had worn Praxa down to something flat and unreadable, and Cyril was coming to suspect, decent, the auditor had been polished the other way, into a bright hard instrument that existed to make numbers agree. It did not go to the gallery. It did not look at the animal. It set up in the ward's small conference room with a slate and a stack of case files and summoned people to it, one at a time, and asked them questions to which it already knew the answers, and Cyril, when his turn came, understood that the auditor was not investigating anything. It was building the paper that would let the station kill the animal cleanly. The specimen cannot be crated, Vunt said to the assembled ward on the 3rd afternoon, reading from its slate in a voice like a ledger closing. The specialist has certified as much. It cannot be returned to service. It represents a standing Class 9 liability in a civilian recovery facility, and it has 1 confirmed fatality on its record. The central administration is not able to carry that liability indefinitely on the strength of a specialist's sentiment and an aide's fondness. It looked up. Since the animal cannot be removed alive without risk to personnel, it will be removed without personnel. Bay 9 will be sealed and flooded with a hypoxic agent at the start of the day shift, 4 mornings from now. The process is painless and requires no one to enter the bay. The matter will then be closed. Cyril heard Aide beside him, let out a long breath of relief, and hated him a little for it and hated himself for understanding it. 4 mornings. No one had to go in. No one had to be brave. The problem would simply, quietly, on a schedule, stop breathing. He looked for Wren. She was at the back by her desk, and she had gone very still, and it was not the trachea stillness. It was the stillness of a person doing arithmetic very fast. "Auditor," she said, "may I enter something into the file before it closes?" Vunt did not look up. "The file is an administrative record, Aide. It reflects decisions, not opinions." "It's a decision I want to enter," Wren said, "about the fatality. The one confirmed fatality that's the whole reason we're gassing Aide." She walked up the center of the ward as she said it, unhurried, and she was carrying her own slate, and Cyril realized she had been carrying it for days, waiting, the way she had waited to show Karam the diet chart, waiting for one person with the authority to close the file to hold still long enough to be handed the truth. "Staff hand Sin. Case reference on your 3rd page. The report says the specimen killed him without provocation." "I was there. I'm the provocation the report doesn't mention." Now Vunt looked up. "I was new," Wren said, "4th week on the ward. Sin had the night care of the specimen before me, back when it was still a recovering patient and not a condemned one, back before any of you decided it was rogue. And every night Sin logged a full feed and a full dose of the Legion-issue nutrient supplement, the expensive stuff, the sable-grade stuff that runs 40 credits a vial. And every morning the animal was thinner and its wound was worse and it lay in the corner and wouldn't eat, and the day file called that stress behavior and it went in the reports, and the reports are how a starving animal got the word rogue attached to it before it had done a single thing." She reached the front. She set her slate on the table beside the auditor's. Sin was skimming. The supplement, the analgesics, the controlled stock, all of it. Selling it down ring. He'd been doing it for months, to the specimen and to the patients, and yes, before you ask, to the child in the 3rd bed, whose graft pain was logged as managed on doses that never reached her arm, which is a thing I can prove because I pulled the dispensary reconciliation, and it's on the slate in front of you, and it does not add up and has never added up, and no one ever made it add up because no one wanted to look. The conference room was silent. Prax's flat gray face had not moved, but her hands, Cyril noticed, had unfolded. "The night it happened," Wren said, "I came in early because the animal wasn't eating and I was worried, and I was new enough to still do something about a thing I was worried about. Sin was in the bay. He had a case open. He was drawing supplement out of the specimen's own line to resell it, from an animal he'd been starving, and I saw him, and he knew I saw him, and he had a blade, and he was between me and the door." She said it flatly, the way she said everything, but Cyril could hear now what the flatness was for, could hear that it was the only way she could get the words out at all. "I'm not going to tell you I was brave. I wasn't. I was a 4th-week aide backed against a wall by a man with a knife, and I did not do anything because there was nothing to do. The specimen did it. The starved, dying, rogue specimen that Sin had been robbing for months got up off the floor it hadn't been able to get up from in a week, and it put itself between the knife and me, and then there was no more knife and no more Sin, and it lay back down and it looked at me. Her voice did not break. It got, if anything, quieter. It looked at me like it was sorry I'd had to see. And I have fed it with my own hands every day since, because on the one night of my life a man came at me with a blade. The only thing on this whole station that stood up for me was the monster you're all so frightened of. So you can close your file, auditor. But you're going to close it with that in it." No one moved. Somewhere down the long ward a monitor chimed and reset. Vunt looked at the slate Wren had set beside its own, at the dispensary reconciliation glowing there, the columns that did not add up, and Cyril watched the bright, hard instrument of the central administration meet. For the first time in the proceeding, a fact it had not already known the shape of. "The blade," Vunt said, "is not in the incident record." "No," Wren said, "it isn't. You should ask why. You should ask who ran the review and who Sin sold to, and whether the reason a med theft ring operating out of this ward never made it into a single report is that a rogue animal is a much cleaner story than a corrupt staff and a station that didn't audit its own dispensary for 3 years. She stepped back. "I'm just an aide. I feed a monster. Nobody's going to take my word for any of it. That's why it's all on the slate, with the reconciliation and the dispensary logs and DISIN's downring transfer records that I pulled from the concourse exchange, which took me 4 months, because I knew this morning was coming and I wasn't going to be standing here with only my word. My word's worth nothing, but the numbers don't feed anybody. Read the numbers. Vunt read the numbers. It took the auditor a long time, and the ward waited, and Sarah watched Praxa watch the auditor, and understood that some slow tectonic thing was moving under the room. When Vunt finally set the slate down, its polished certainty had a hairline through it. This does not change the animal's classification, it said, but it said it carefully now, feeling for the ground. A Class 9 predator that has killed remains a Class 9 predator that has killed, regardless of the provocation. The liability is the same. The liability is not the same, Karam said from the doorway, where he had been standing longer than any of them had realized. You keep using that word, auditor, and you are using it wrong, and I am the only person in this room qualified to tell you so, so listen. Liability is the risk that a thing will harm what it should not. You have spent 3 days measuring this animal's liability by asking whether it will kill, and the answer is yes, obviously. It is a legion sable, of course it will kill. You have not once asked the question that actually determines liability, which is what will it kill. He came into the room. I have handled war beasts for 40 years. The dangerous ones, the truly dangerous ones, the ones I put down without hesitation, are the ones that cannot tell the difference between a threat and a bystander. That animal can. That animal, starving and dying in the one violent moment of its time here, killed the man with the blade and did not touch the aide he was cornering, and then it lay back down. That is not a liability. That is the most discriminating use of force I have witnessed in my career, from an animal that had every excuse to be indiscriminate, and you are about to gas it to close a paperwork error. The schedule is set, Vunt said, but there was no iron in it now. Then unset it, Praxa said. Every head in the room turned. The overseer had not raised her voice. She never raised her voice. You came up from Central to close a file, auditor, and I have let you, because that is the chain and I keep the chain, Praxa said. But this is my ward, and the reconciliation the aide has put in front of you is a matter I should have caught 3 years ago and did not, and I will not compound one failure of attention with a second one dressed up as a schedule. I am exercising a ward supervisor's authority to suspend a disposition pending review of new evidence. The gassing is postponed. The dispensary is impounded as of now. And you, auditor, are going to spend the rest of your visit finding out who bought what DISIN sold, because I have run this ward for 30 years and I would like, before I retire, to know exactly how badly I was robbed. She folded her hands again. The animal stays, she said, until I say otherwise. Aide Calloway, take your slate, and take the cooler out of the cold store and put it back under your desk where you can reach it, because it appears we are keeping the thing, and it appears you are the only one it lets feed it, which makes you, as of this moment, its handler of record. Congratulations. It comes with no raise. Sarah would remember that as the high point. The moment the room turned, the moment the truth got into the file, the moment the small plain human at the back of the ward won. He would remember it because of how short it was, and because of what interrupted it 4 hours later at the changeover to night shift, when the station's outer ring alarm began to sound. The alarm was not the fire tone, and it was not the pressure tone, and it took Cyril a moment to place it because he had heard it only in drills. It was the intrusion tone. Someone had come aboard Casker Reach who was not supposed to be aboard Casker Reach. That's a drill, Aide said. It has to be a drill. They run the intrusion drill in the spring. The lights changed. The bright healing panels dropped to the amber of a station shedding non-essential load, and the long ward's main doors sealed with a sound Cyril felt in his teeth, and a voice came over the ward channel that was not the station's calm automated voice, but a live one, tight and fast. All wards, this is Warden Ossel. We have hostiles on the convalescent tier. Repeat, hostiles on the tier. This is not a drill. Seal your bays and hold. Security is responding. The channel cut. For a moment, nobody in Recovery Ward 6 did anything at all. Cyril stood at the nurse's station with the impounded dispensary slate still in his hand, and felt the particular helplessness of a person whose entire training was about mending things, and contained not one instruction for this. Down the long ward, 40 patients lay in 40 beds, post-surgical graft frozen, sedated, half of them unable to sit up, none of them able to run. Pell was in the third bed. The child could not move her legs. That was the arithmetic, and it did itself, cold and complete in the space of a breath. If something came through those doors, the ward could not run and the ward could not fight, and security was, at best guess, a dozen wardens for a station tier the size of a town. "Who are they?" Aide whispered. It was Wren who answered from her desk, where she had pulled up the tier's public channel and was reading it with the trachea face gone hard. "They came in on a medical tender, forged transit. They're not raiders, not the random kind." She looked up. They knew the security rotation. They knew the convalescent tier runs light on wardens because who attacks a hospital? And they went straight for the dispensary hub on the tier spine, which is the central pharmaceutical store for 6 wards, which is worth more downring than this whole station's payroll. She met Cyril's eyes, and he saw her arrive at the thing a half-second before she said it. "They're Dis-Syn's people, or the people Dis-Syn sold to. We impounded the dispensary 4 hours ago and locked the ring's biggest med supply behind ward seals, and 4 hours later a crew that knew exactly where to come is on the tier." Her jaw set. "We spooked the supply, and the supply came to collect." "That is not possible in 4 hours, Karam said. He had come up from the shuttle dock at a run, and stood now in the ward's amber light with his working leathers, and no weapon, and the face of a soldier reading a battlefield. "No crew mobilizes and forges a berth and boards in 4 hours. "Then they were already coming," Wren said, "and we just gave them a reason to hurry." The distinction did not matter, and everyone in the ward knew it did not matter. What mattered was on the tier channel, which Cyril now pulled onto the main display, and which showed the tier map in schematic, and showed the small clustered markers of Warden Ossel's people falling back from the spine, and showed the larger, colder markers of the intruders moving not toward the dispensary hub, which was sealed, but away from it, outward along the ring, toward the wards, toward the soft targets, toward the leverage. "They can't crack the dispensary seals fast," Wren said, tracking it. "Ward impound seals are hard, so they're not going to crack them. They're going to take hostages and trade them for the unlocked codes." She stood. "They're coming here. We're the nearest ward to the spine, and we're the one that just impounded their supply. They're coming here first." "Security," Aide started. "Security is a dozen wardens falling back from a crew that outplanned them," Wren said. "Look at the map. Ossel's people are between the intruders and the spine, holding the wrong thing, holding the dispensary the crew already gave up on. Nobody is between the intruders and this ward." She was already moving down the long ward, checking bed by bed, and Cyril followed because following her was the only idea he had. 40 patients who can't move, one warden's voice on a channel. "Sealed doors that'll hold for maybe 4 minutes against a breach charge. That's what we've got." "That is not what we have got," Karam said. He had not moved. He stood at the mouth of the ward, and he was looking at the rear wall, up at the gallery, and through the armored glass of the gallery, dimly, in the amber light, at the great gray shape that had risen to its feet in Bay 9 and was standing very still, facing the sealed door of its bay, ears forward, because the intrusion alarm had reached it too, and it had understood something about the sound that no one had taught it and no legion had bred into it, which was that its ward was in danger. "We have," Karam said, "the most discriminating instrument of force I have ever certified, standing in a sealed room 40 meters from a corridor full of people who are about to come here to hurt the things it has decided are its own." He turned to Wren, and his voice was very level, the voice of a man offering a thing he was not sure should be offered. You are its handler of record. The overseer said so herself 4 hours ago, and it is in the file. You are the only person alive it will take direction from. So I am going to ask you the only question that matters, Aide, and I am going to ask it once, because we do not have time for me to ask it twice. He looked at her. Can you point it? The ward went silent under the alarm. Cyril understood the question. It was not can you release it. Anyone could release it. The bay door had a manual override. A starved animal loose in a corridor of intruders was simply a second disaster layered on the first, an indiscriminate horror that would kill wardens and patients and raiders without distinction, which was exactly the thing every classification had feared for 114 days. The question Karam was asking was the only one that made the difference between a weapon and a massacre. Not can you let it out, can you tell it who? Wren looked up at the gallery, at Sunday standing in the amber light facing the door, waiting the way he always waited, and Cyril watched her not answer for 1 second too, watched her weigh a thing no Aide should ever have to weigh, and then she said, I don't point him. Karam's crest fell. I don't point him, Wren said again, and now she was moving fast toward the gallery stair, because he's not a weapon and you can't aim a person, and if I go in there and try to send him down that corridor like a missile, he'll know it's wrong and it'll be wrong, and something that's wrong is exactly the thing you're all afraid of. That's the mistake. That's the mistake every handler made for 4 months. You keep trying to command him. She hit the stair. I'm not going to command him. I'm going to do what I do every day. I'm going to go stand between him and the thing that's threatening his ward and be calm and let him decide. He's better at deciding than any of us. He proved that with this sin. He killed the blade and left the girl. I'm going to trust him to know the difference again because he always has, and the only thing I have to do, she reached the gallery door and put her hand on the reader, is be there. So he knows which side of me the ward is on. That is insane, Karam said, but he was following her up the stair and so was Cyril, because whatever this was it was the only plan in the building. You said it yourself, Wren said, not stopping. You can't call off the kind of loyalty he has. Fine, then we don't call it off. We put me where I need him and we let it point itself. Cyril. She did not look back at him, but she knew he was there. The tier map. When the intruders reach the ward doors, I need to know from which corridor, and I need to know before the doors go because I have to be standing in the right place when they come through. Can you feed me the map? Yes, Cyril said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Yes, I can feed you the map. Then feed me the map, Wren said, and opened the gallery door and started down toward the bay where the monster was waiting for her, in the amber light, as if it had been waiting for exactly this, its whole strange condemned life. Cyril took the nurse's station like a post. He put the tier map on the main display and split his own slate to the ward's door sensors, and he became, for the next 11 minutes, a pair of eyes for a woman he could not see. And it was the most important thing he had ever done, and it consisted entirely of reading numbers out loud in a steady voice, which was, he would think later, exactly the human's whole method handed to him to hold. They've left the spine, he said into the ward channel which Wren had patched to her earpiece. 6 markers, moving along the ring toward us. Warden Ossel's people are behind them, not between. You have, he did the arithmetic, 4 minutes, maybe 5, before they reach the ward's outer doors. Copy, Wren's voice came back flat and close. Through the gallery glass Cyril could see her now, down in the bay, and the sight of it stopped his breath for the 100th time in a week. The small human standing at the shoulder of the enormous animal, one hand resting on the slate hide, both of them facing the bay's inner door, the one that opened onto the long ward. She had not put a lattice on it. She had not put a collar on it. She stood beside it the way a person stands beside another person. Sunday's up. He knows something's wrong. He's not agitated. He's just ready. Cyril, when they breach the ward doors, I need the corridor they come through. He and I are going to be at the ward end of it. Everything behind us is ours. Everything coming up it isn't. That's the whole plan. That's all he needs from me. The patients, Cyril said, Pell. Aide, Wren said. Get every bed that can be moved to the far end of the ward behind the graph frame bulkhead and get Pell there first, and then get yourself there and stay down. The bulkhead's the one hard wall you've got. Put the patients behind it and put the whole ward behind us. A pause. And Cyril, whatever you hear, whatever the censors say, do not open the gallery, do not send anyone into the ward. The single worst thing that could happen right now is one of ours moving fast in a place Sunday's deciding about. He reads fast movement toward me as threat. Everyone freezes. Everyone stays where they are. Slow is safe. Tell them. Slow is safe. Cyril told them. He said it on the ward channel in the steadiest voice he owned. Slow is safe. Freeze and be slow. And up and down the long ward he watched the staff take it in and, incredibly, obey. Watched Aide and two orderlies begin the careful, terrible work of wheeling immobile patients toward the bulkhead at a walk. No running. No fast movement. In a ward that had 90 seconds before the doors gave. He watched Pell's bed go first. The child's small face turned back over her shoulder toward the gallery, toward the bay, and Cyril realized the girl was not afraid. She had found the mirror on its jointed arm. Even now, even being wheeled to a bulkhead under an intrusion alarm, and she had angled it to catch the bay, and she was watching Sunday, and her face was the only calm face in the ward besides the one down in the bay beside the animal. 60 seconds, Cyril said. They're at the outer doors. They've got a breach charge, I can see them setting it. Outer doors are, Wren, they're going to blow the outer doors and the inner doors together. They're stacked. When they go you'll have both open at once. A straight run from the outer corridor into the ward. Which corridor? Wren said. East, the east approach. They'll come through the east doors into the head of the ward. Then that's where we'll be. He heard her move. Through the glass he saw the bay's inner door cycle, saw it open onto the amber ward, saw the small human step through it into the long room, and behind her, unhurried, filling the doorway and then the room, the animal followed. It did not bound. It did not charge. It walked out of the bay it had been condemned in and into the ward at Wren's shoulder at a walk, matching her pace, and the two of them crossed the head of the long ward together and stopped, facing the sealed east doors, the woman and the war beast, and Wren went down on one knee beside it with one hand flat on its shoulder, and she was talking to it. Cyril could see her mouth moving, low and level about nothing, the way she always did. 30 seconds. Wren, get behind the. There's nothing to get behind, you're in the open. No, she said. That's the point. I have to be where he can see me and see them at the same time. If I hide, he has to choose between guarding me and facing them. If I'm right here out in the open, calm, then guarding me and facing them are the same direction, and he doesn't have to choose anything. A breath. He's not shaking, Cyril. 40 patients behind a bulkhead and 6 armed men about to come through that door, and the animal everybody called Rogue is the steadiest thing in this room. Tell the ward that. Someday, tell them what steady looks like. The doors blew. Cyril's sensors whited out with the charge and came back, and through the gallery glass he saw the east doors of the long ward fold inward in a gout of smoke, both sets at once as he'd warned, and the amber corridor beyond them full of moving shapes, 6 of them, hard-suited, weapons up, fast, professional, pouring through the breach into the head of the ward the way water pours through a broken dam. And stopping. He would try for the rest of his life to describe to people what it was to watch 6 armed professionals come through a breach at a dead run and stop. Not fall. Not fight. Stop. Because the thing waiting for them in the amber light at the head of the ward was not a warden and not a locked door and not a patient on a bed. It was a small plain human kneeling in the open with her hand on the shoulder of something that had risen now to its full height beside her, slate against the amber, ears forward, utterly still, looking at the 6 of them out of eyes like wet coins with an expression Cyril had no word for, and the intruders clearly did. The lead one's weapon came up. Wren did not move. She stayed on her knee with her hand on the animal's shoulder, and she said one thing, one word, that carried up to the gallery in the ringing silence after the charge, and it was not a command to the beast, and it was not a plea to the men. It was, of all things, addressed to the animal, and it was the thing she said to it every morning when she came through the feeding door, and it was, "Aide." And the animal, which had waited 114 days at a small gray door for the one kind part of its day, understood that the kind part had come, and that the ward was behind it, and that the 6 fast things pouring through the broken door were the thing the alarm had meant, and it did the arithmetic it had done once before for a man with a blade, and it made, in Karam's word, the most discriminating use of force in the specialist's long career, and Cyril did not watch the rest. He did not watch it because Wren had told the ward to freeze and be slow, and he was ward staff and he obeyed. And he did not watch it because the frozen moment was the last thing his sensors gave him cleanly before the amber light and the smoke and the sheer speed of what crossed the head of the ward took the picture apart. And he did not watch it because some things a person is not required to watch. He heard it. It was very short. The tier channel, which had 6 cold markers clustered at the east doors of Recovery Ward 6, showed them for 1 more second, and then showed 5. And then the display could not keep up with the arithmetic any better than Cyril could, and the numbers simply came down, one after another, faster than a person could have read them aloud, and were gone, and the corridor at the head of the ward, which had been full of noise, was not full of noise any more. It went quiet the way Bay 9 went quiet after the feeding door closed, completely and all at once, and with a sense that whatever had needed doing had been attended to. "Wren," Cyril said into the channel. His voice was not steady now. "Wren." "I'm here," she said. He looked down through the glass. She was still on her knee at the head of the ward, in the smoke and the amber light, and she had not moved, and she was not hurt. And beside her the animal had come back to her shoulder from wherever the short violent arithmetic had taken it, and it was lowering itself down beside her, unhurried, and it put its great head against her, and she put her arm over the slate neck the way a person leans on a thing they are glad is still there. And the two of them knelt together at the broken east doors of Recovery Ward 6 in the settling smoke, and behind the bulkhead at the far end 40 patients breathed. And in the third bed, a child watched it all in a mirror on a jointed arm and did not look away. For a moment the only sound in Recovery Ward 6 was the alarm, still cycling, indifferent, and the small human wet-eyed breaths of 40 patients realizing they were alive. Then Karam was moving down the gallery stair, and Cyril with him, and Aide coming out from behind the bulkhead pale as milk, and the ward filled with the careful footsteps of people approaching a thing they could not quite believe had happened. Nobody went near the east doors. Nobody looked too long at the corridor beyond them. Karam crossed to the head of the ward and stopped a respectful distance from the woman and the animal, and he did not offer to help her up, because you did not, Cyril understood, put your hand near a sable that had just decided the world, but he crouched down to her level, which from a Kedan warrior was a form of salute, and he looked at the two of them, the Aide and the beast, kneeling together in the smoke. "In 40 years, Karam said quietly, I have never certified a thing I am about to certify, so I want to be sure I saw it. It came through that door and it stopped because you told it easy, and then it did not stop because 6 armed men came through after them, and then it stopped again and came back to you and lay down. It started and stopped on your word in the middle of the fastest violence I have ever failed to follow with my eyes." He was not asking. He was reciting so that later he could swear to it. "It is not rogue. It was never rogue. It is the most disciplined animal I have handled, and no one bred that discipline into it. You did, with a cooler under a desk and a word every morning." "I didn't do anything," Wren said. Her voice was rough now. The flatness had finally cracked here after where it was safe to. "He did it. I just stood where he could see me." "Yes," Karam said. "That is what handling is. That is the whole of it, and it took me 40 years to learn it, and you knew it at 20. Stand where they can see you." He straightened. "Get up, Aide, slowly. We are not finished, and I do not think you are going to like the reason." The reason was on the tier channel and Cyril had it up on his slate and he had been dreading having to say it. The 6 that came here weren't the crew, he said. They were the assault element. The rest of them, he read it off the map, the cold markers still holding, well down the ring, the rest of them are 3 wards over. Ward 2, the critical care ward. They didn't come for our impound after all, or not only. They took the critical ward because it's got the tightest patients and the fewest doors, and they've got Warden Ossel and what's left of his people pinned in the tier junction between here and there, and the crew's leader is on the open channel making demands, and the demand is the dispensary unlock codes in exchange for not venting Ward 2 to vacuum. He looked up. There are 19 patients in Ward 2 who can't move, and a hostage. And the crew has a section vent control, and Warden Ossel can't reach them, and station security is 40 minutes out because nobody keeps a response element at a hospital. The ward was silent. They think it's over, Wren said slowly. The crew. They sent 6 people to take our ward and hold the impound, and those 6 aren't answering their channel anymore, and the leader doesn't know why, and in a minute he's going to send someone to find out, and when that someone gets to our east doors, she stopped. She looked at the animal beside her, and the animal looked back at her, and Cyril watched a decision move across the small, plain face that he would not have had the courage to make in 100 years. They're going to vent a ward full of children over a lock code, and the only thing on this station fast enough to cross the contested junction and reach them before security does is standing right here, and it just proved it can tell a threat from a bystander in the middle of a breach. She got to her feet. Her legs, Cyril saw, were unsteady, and her jaw was set against it. Cyril, get me a route to the Ward 2 junction that keeps me out of Ossel's crossfire. Karam, you know how these crews break. Tell me what happens to a leader on an open channel when his hostage hold suddenly stops being the scariest thing on the tier. She put her hand back on the animal's shoulder. We're going to go get the warden. And then we're going to go get the ward. Warden Ossel had been a station warden for 22 years and had drawn his sidearm exactly 4 times and fired it never, and he was pinned behind a coolant riser in the Ward 2 junction with a burn along his ribs and 3 of his people down and not dead behind him. And he had already made his peace with the arithmetic, which was that the crew in the critical ward was going to vent 19 patients, and his own body was going to be found here having failed to prevent it. When the door at the Ward 6 end of the junction opened, slow, and a human girl in Aide's scrubs stepped through it into the fire. He tried to wave her back. He could not make his voice work well enough to shout, and she was not looking at him anyway. She was looking down the junction at the crew's rear position, the 2 shooters the leader had left to hold the approach, and Ossel thought, with the strange clarity of a man who has stopped expecting to live, that he was about to watch a child get killed. He had time to think it. He had time to see the crew's rear shooters see her too, and turn, and bring their weapons around, and he had time to draw breath to spend his voice on a warning that would not arrive in time. He did not have time to see what came through the door behind her. Later Ossel would give 3 separate statements, to the station, to the Legion, and to the Coalition inquiry, and all 3 would use almost the same words because he could not find better ones. He would say, the girl stepped into the junction and knelt down in the open in the fire and put her hand out flat to the side, palm down, the way you calm a nervous mount. He would say, she said something, 1 word low, and it was not to the shooters and it was not to me. He would say, and then the junction was not a place I could describe anymore, because the thing that came through the door moved faster than the lights could keep it. And I have been a warden 22 years, and I have never wanted so badly to look away from something and been so unable to. And it went down the junction toward the crew's rear position, and the position stopped shooting. And then there was no position, and the whole thing took less time than it takes to say Ward 2. And at no point, at no single point, did the animal come within 2 body lengths of me or my down people, though we were closer to it than the crew was. He would say, it went around us. In the middle of it, at that speed, it went around us, because the girl was between it and us, and the girl was calm. What Ossel said, At the time, when the junction had gone quiet and the girl came and knelt over him and put pressure on the burn along his ribs with hands that were shaking now that the moving was done, what is that? His name's Sunday, the girl said. Hold still, you're bleeding. Sunday easy, he's ours. He's one of ours, all right, ours. And Ossel, half conscious, watched the enormous slate animal that had just unmade two armed men come and stand over the two of them. Over the warden it had gone around and the girl who had named it, and lower its great head and breathe, slow, and he understood that he had been added to a list, the list of things the animal had decided were its own, and that being on that list was the safest a man could be on Cassier reach. The leader, the girl said into her channel. Cyril, where's the leader? Still in Ward 2, Cyril's voice thin over the fire. Still on the open channel. He's asking his rear element to report and they're not answering and he doesn't like it. He's getting agitated. He's threatening the vent. You have to, the hostage. He's got the ward physician at the vent control and he's counting. Then we're out of slow, Wren said. She looked down at Ossel. Warden, can your people carry you back to Ward 6? Leave me, Ossel said. Go. That's not how it works, Wren said. Nobody gets left, that's the whole thing. That's the entire thing. And she turned to the far door of the junction, the one that opened onto the critical ward, onto 19 immobile patients, and a physician at event control and a crew leader counting down. And she stood, and the animal stood with her, and she did not look afraid and she did not look brave. She looked like a woman going to do a job that had to be done. And Ossel, propped against the coolant riser with his people crawling toward him, watched the girl and the monster cross the last stretch of junction toward the ward together and thought, humanity did not send us soldiers. Humanity sent us this small, tired person who would not leave a warden in a corridor, and the thing that loves her, and God help whatever is counting down on the other side of that door. The critical ward was a long, bright room like her own, and it had gone amber like her own. And at the far end of it, a man stood with his back to a bank of 19 life support frames and one hand on the section vent control. And his name, Wren would learn later, was Hark. And he had run the downring supply the night care of a war beast had once nearly exposed. And he had come to Cassier Reach to close that loose end and collect a fortune in impounded pharmaceuticals. And he was, at this precise moment, the most frightened man on the station and did not yet know why. He knew when the door opened. Wren came through it slow, both hands open and out from her sides, and she stopped just inside, and she let the man see her, a small unarmed aide in scrubs, and she watched his weapon come up and steady on her chest, and she made herself keep breathing. Behind her in the doorway the animal did not come through. She had left it in the junction. That was the plan she had built in the 4 seconds of the approach, reading the vent control and the countdown and the hostage, and it was the hardest thing she had ever asked of it and it had held. Sunday stood in the doorway at her back, filling it still, and did not enter the ward, because a vent control is a button and a button is faster than any animal alive, and she was not going to trade 19 patients on the chance that speed beat a trigger. That's far enough, Hark said. Codes, now. Or I open the section and everything in here goes to vacuum, starting with the doctor. At the vent control, held there by the man's other hand twisted in her collar, the ward's chief physician, an elderly Asheny with her skin gone the white of pure terror, made a small sound. You've got no play here, Aide. You've got no warden and no weapon, and I've got 190 seconds of air in this section once I crack it. Codes. I don't have the codes, Wren said. I'm an aide, I feed people. Nobody gives me dispensary codes. True, and she watched it land, watched the calculation stutter behind his eyes. But I can get them. Slow. Everybody stays slow and I can end this without anybody venting anybody. There's no reason for the doctor to be at that panel. Let her step back an aisle. Where are my people? Hark said. There it was. Wren had been waiting for it. Which people? She said. The 6 I sent to your ward, they've gone dark. The 2 I left in the junction dark. My whole rear dark in the last 4 minutes, and you walk in here alone and slow and calm, and you don't have the codes and you're not afraid of a man with his hand on a vent. And I want to know." His voice climbed. "I want to know what happened to my people." "Something in this ward has a very bad history with your operation," Ren said quietly. "You want to know what happened to your people. I think part of you already does. I think you knew what happened to Sin 3 years ago, the man who used to run your supply out of my ward. The official record says a rogue animal killed him. You know that's the record because your operation is the reason that's the record. A rogue animal is a much better story for you than a staff hand who got caught stealing from patients and pulled a blade on a witness. You paid for that story. You've been living off that story for 3 years." She took one step, just one, slow. "Here's the part you don't know. The story's true. There was an animal, it's still here. It's the reason Sin's dead, and it's the reason your 6 went dark in my ward, and it's the reason your junction team went quiet, and it is standing in the doorway behind me right now, and the only thing, Hark, keeping it in that doorway and not across this room is me. Telling it easy. So look." He looked. She watched his eyes go past her to the doorway, to the enormous slate shape that filled it, standing utterly still in the amber light, ears forward, looking at him out of eyes like wet coins with no anger in them at all. And she watched 3 years of a paid-for lie arrive in Hark's body all at once, watched him understand that the rogue animal was not a story, that it was real, that it was here, that it had already been through his people, and that it was being still, right now, on purpose. Because a woman with open hands was telling it to be. "It's calm," Ren said. "You see how calm it is. That's the part everybody gets wrong. When it's snarling, you're fine. It's not snarling. It's the calmest thing in this room, calmer than the doctor, calmer than you, and it is looking at you the way it looked at Sin, and the single thread holding it there is my voice. And if your hand so much as twitches on that vent, if this ward starts venting and the patients I feed start dying, then I stop having any reason at all to keep saying easy." She held his eyes. "I don't want that. I came in slow because I don't want that. Nobody has to go the way Sin went. Let the doctor step back from the panel. Take your hand off the vent. And you get to walk out of here and be arrested, which, right now, is the best thing that could possibly happen to you, and you know it. Slow. Everybody slow." For 3 seconds the ward hung on the edge of the worst thing. Then Hark's hand came off the vent control, and he stepped back from it, away from the panel, and the elderly physician tore free of his slackened grip and stumbled clear. And the moment the hostage was out of the line, the whole calculus of the room changed, and Ren said, "Doctor, down now." And the physician dropped, and Ren said one word to the doorway, and she did not watch the rest of it either. It was very short. When it was over, the vent control glowed its steady, untriggered green, and 19 patients breathed their 19 measured breaths, and the ward's chief physician lay on the floor with her hands over her head, unharmed. And Hark was a matter the record would describe with the same clean brevity it had once used for Sin. And the animal came back across the bright ward to where Ren had gone down to one knee, and it put its head against her. And she wrapped both arms around its neck and pressed her face into the slate hide and stayed that way, shaking, while the alarm cycled and the station security element that was still 30 minutes out kept saying, uselessly on the channel, "Hold your positions. Help is coming." Help was not coming. Help was already here, and had been for 114 days, in a sealed bay, being fed out of a cooler under a desk. The station security element reached the convalescent tier 41 minutes after the intrusion tone first sounded, and by the time they arrived in their hard suits with their heavy weapons and their careful room-by-room advance, there was nothing left for them to do but count. They counted. The count was strange, and they had trouble with their reports because the reports had columns for coalition casualties and civilian casualties and structural damage, and every one of those columns held a 0. 19 critical patients, unharmed. 40 recovery patients, unharmed. 1 warden and 3 of his people, Wounded, all four stable, all four alive because a physician's aide had knelt over a coolant riser and put pressure on a burn. Ward staff, unharmed. One elderly physician, unharmed. The intruders, the professional crew that had outplanned station security and boarded a hospital and taken a critical ward and held a section vent over the heads of 19 immobile patients, were accounted for in a single line. The security commander read 3 times and then went and looked at the tier map about, because he did not believe a hospital ward had produced that line. And then he came to Recovery Ward 6, because everything led back to Recovery Ward 6, and he found the head of the ward scorched, and the east doors folded in, and a specialist of the Border Legion sitting on an overturned equipment crate with his head in his hands, not from grief, but from something closer to religious overload, and 40 patients being wheeled slowly back to their beds from behind a bulkhead, and a child in the 3rd bed with a mirror on a jointed arm who informed him, before he had asked anything, that the monster's name was Sunday, and that it had saved everyone, and that the record had better say so. And at the mouth of the ward, at a battered aide's desk with a strip of thermal cloth curtaining the footwell, the security commander found a small plain human sitting very still in a chair that did not fit her, with a war beast lying across the whole floor of the ward station beside her, its enormous head resting on her feet, both of them so quiet and so spent that, for a moment he took them for a single exhausted thing. The human had pulled the thermal cloth aside. She was reaching into the cooler under the desk. She took out a portion packet of rendered muscle, and she opened it, and she set it down on the floor in front of the animal's nose, and the animal, which had crossed a contested tier and unmade a professional crew, and saved 4 wards and asked for nothing, ate its dinner at last, out of her hand in the open, where anyone could see. "Ma'am," the security commander said, "I'm going to need a statement about the animal." "His name's Sunday," Wren said without looking up, "and he's not in trouble. Whatever your statement says, it starts with that. He's not in trouble. Not ever again." The inquiry took 9 days, and Cyril attended all of it, because he was the ward tech who had kept the log he had told himself he was not keeping, and it turned out that a full, time-stamped, obsessively detailed record of everything that had happened in Recovery Ward 6 for 4 months was the single most valuable object on Cassiar Reach. He had not meant to keep it. He had told himself, standing at the rail on that first morning, that he would not be the reason the humming stopped, and so he had not logged Wren's trips into the bay in the official record. But Cyril was asheny, and the compulsion to file did not care what he told himself, and it had simply rooted itself somewhere private, into his own pad, into a shadow record he never showed anyone and could not stop writing. The diet chart, the reopened shoulder wound, the 6 failed beastmasters and their 6 identical reports, the day the animal put its head in the girl's lap, Karam's exact words in the gallery, the dispensary reconciliation, the timestamps of the raid down to the second. It was all there, and when the coalition inquiry convened in Prax's small conference room and began, in its ponderous way, to try to establish what had happened, Cyril set the shadow record on the table, and it did in 9 days what the official version would never have done at all. It rewrote Sin. That was the part Cyril cared about, watching Wren across the conference room over those 9 days. The official incident file, the one that had called a starving animal rogue to cover a med theft ring, came apart under the reconciliation and the downring transfer records and Hark's own operation, which security peeled open now like a fruit. Sin had been the ring's inside man. He had skimmed the analgesics that never reached Pell's arm and the supplement that never reached the animal's line, and when a 4th-week aide had walked in on him, he had drawn a blade that a subsequent review had made vanish, and the animal that killed him had been not a rogue asset but a dying patient defending the one person who had been kind to it. The inquiry entered all of it into the record. It struck the word rogue from the case file. It struck the recommendation to terminate, and it entered in the flat permanent language of a coalition finding, a line that Cyril copied into his own pad and kept. The specimen's use of force in both the Descent incident and the Tier intrusion is assessed as discriminate, proportionate, and directed solely against armed aggressors. No bystander, patient, or staff member was harmed in either event. The classification of the specimen as rogue is vacated. Vacated, Wren said when they read her that line. It was the only time in 9 days Cyril saw her come close to breaking. Say the rest of it. Say his name's not Rogue. Say it out loud on the record, where the file can see it. The specimen is not classified Rogue, the coalition adjudicator said, and Wren nodded once and put her trachea face back on, and that was the last time anyone in the inquiry used the word. Auditor Vunt reversed itself on the 6th day. Cyril had not thought the polished instrument capable of it, but the numbers did not feed anybody, and the auditor had spent 3 days following Hark's money into corners of the down ring that made even a Corving compliance officer's certainty crack. And on the 6th day it stood before the inquiry and entered a finding that its own predecessor's disposition schedule had been founded on a falsified incident record, and that the animal it had ordered gassed 4 days before that animal saved 4 wards had been, in the auditor's exact and grudging words, wrongly assessed on every material point. It was not an apology. Corvin auditors did not apologize, but it was as close as the species came, and Cyril filed it. And on the 7th day, the Legion came back for its asset. The legate arrived on a fast cutter with an honor detail and a set of forms, and her name was Legate Osric, and she was Keaton like Karam but polished where he was worn, and she came into Recovery Ward 6 with the brisk confidence of an institution that has read a report and reached a decision, and the report was the coalition finding, and the decision was that a Border Legion Sable that had just demonstrated the most discriminate combat performance in the Legion's recent memory was, whatever a hospital thought, an extraordinarily valuable military asset, and it was coming home. The animal is Legion property, Osric said to Praxa in the conference room with the forms already on the table. It was convalesced here under a return-to-service order that was never rescinded, only suspended, and the grounds for suspension, the rogue classification, have now been vacated by the Coalition's own inquiry, which means the animal is fit for service and Legion property, and I am authorized to take custody of it today. I have a transfer cradle on the cutter. She permitted herself a thin smile. A better one than my colleague tried, and I understand there is a handler here it responds to. She is welcome to enlist. The Legion always has room for a genuine talent. Cyril watched the ward absorb it. He watched Karam, who had stayed for the inquiry and was leaning against the far wall in his worn leathers, go very still. He watched Praxa fold her hands. And he watched Wren at the back, who did not go pale and did not stand up straighter and who said, "No." "I have not made you an offer yet, Aide," Osric said. "You made 3, Wren said. You're taking him, I can come, or I can stay. No to all of it." She came forward to the table, small and plain and entirely unhurried, and Cyril realized she had been assembling this too in the 7 days, the way she assembled everything, waiting for the person with the authority to hold still. You want to take a Legion Sable that has spent 4 months deciding it does not have a master and put it back in a transfer cradle, and ship it to a border unit, and hand it a control lattice. I've watched 6 of your beast masters and 1 of your specialists try to make that animal answer to a lattice, and it lay down and shut its eyes at every one of them, and the only reason it didn't shut its eyes at Hark's crew is that they came at its ward. It doesn't serve, Legate. It's not that it won't. It's that it has stopped being the kind of thing that serves, and if you crate it and ship it to a unit and command it, one of 2 things happens. Either it lies down and does nothing, and you've spent a fortune on a cutter to acquire an animal that ignores you, or it decides your unit is a threat to the thing it's actually loyal to, which is not the Legion and is not me. It's the ward, it's the patients, it's the small helpless things it's decided are its own. And then it is exactly the rogue your file used to call it, except this time it'll be true and it'll be your fault and it'll be in your unit. She set her own slate on the table beside the forms. That's not a threat. That's Karam's own assessment, which is on this slate which he wrote before the raid. Ask him. He's standing right there. Every head turned to Karam. She is correct, Karam said. On all of it. I certified the animal cannot be reclaimed to service, and the raid did not change that. It confirmed it. The animal did not fight for the Legion at that breach. It fought for a child in a bed and a girl with a cooler. You cannot transfer that loyalty, Legate. You can only break it, and a broken sable is the most dangerous object my caste knows how to make. He pushed off the wall. I will tell you what I told the Overseer, and I will put my name on it in front of the Legion and let them make of it what they will. That animal has retired. It has chosen a hospital. In 40 years I have never seen a war beast choose anything, and I am not going to be the man who takes the one that did and breaks it to prove a point about property law. Legate Osric looked at the forms on the table and at the two Keaton on opposite sides of the room, the polished institution and the worn specialist, and Sarah watched her recalculate, because she was not a fool, and the thing she had come to collect had just been described to her, by her own caste's expert, as an asset that would either ignore her or destroy her unit. There was a long silence. There is a third option, Praxa said, unfolding her hands, which the legate has not considered because it is not in a legion's nature to consider it, and I mean that as a compliment to a hospital. She had used the phrasing before, Cyril realized. She had used it on the auditor. It was, he understood, the closest thing Praxa had to a creed. The Legion does not want an asset it cannot command and cannot ship and cannot safely field. The Legion wants, at most, not to look foolish for having lost one, so do not lose it, gift it. She let that sit. Enter it in your records as a Legion Sable seconded in perpetuity to Cassier Reach Convalescent Tier as a resident protective companion, under the care of its handler of record, Aide Calloway. The Legion keeps the credit for the most discriminate combat animal in its history and spends nothing to feed it. The hospital keeps the animal that saved 4 wards. The handler keeps the thing she has been keeping out of her own wage for 4 months. And no one, Legate, has to explain to a coalition inquiry why the Legion crated and shipped a decorated animal away from the sick children it protects. 3 weeks after that same Legion tried to gas it. Her flat gray gaze did not move. I have run this ward 30 years. I know a good trade. This is a good trade, take it. Legate Osric took it. She took it with a legate's grace, which is to say she made it sound like the Legion's idea, and she signed the secondment in perpetuity into the form she had brought to take the animal away, and she left on her fast cutter with the credit for a war hero and none of the cost, and she was, Cyril thought, probably relieved, because he had watched her look through the gallery glass once, at the great slate animal lying in the noon light with its head on its paws watching a small gray door, and he had seen her understand. The way Karam had understood, that whatever was down there did not belong to the Legion anymore and had not for a long time. The coalition, having failed to gas the animal and failed to reclaim the animal, did the third thing large institutions do with a thing they cannot destroy or own. It studied it. It sent a committee. The committee arrived a month after the raid, 6 analysts from the coalition's security directorate, and its charter was to understand how a single physician's aide with no weapon and no training had produced, out of a condemned Legion Sable, the most discriminate protective outcome in the directorate's records, so that the method could be documented, standardized, and the charter said without a trace of irony deployed. Cyril sat in on their interviews because someone had to keep them from getting eaten, a job that turned out to consist entirely of telling them to slow down and stop making sudden movements toward Ren, which was, he noted, the entire method they had come to study, being demonstrated on them, unnoticed by him. They interviewed Ren for 11 days. Cyril kept the transcript. His favorite exchange, the one he read to Aide afterward until Aide begged him to stop, went like this. Aide Calloway, when you positioned yourself at the head of the ward during the breach, What command posture did you employ to direct the animal onto the hostiles? None, Ren said. I knelt down and told him to take it easy. And the tactical signal that redirected him from the hostiles back to a defensive posture after the engagement. I didn't redirect him, he was done, he came back. He self-terminated the engagement. He finished, Ren said, because there was nothing left that was a threat to the ward. That's not a posture, that's just him being able to tell the difference. You keep looking for the button I pushed. There's no button. I fed him every day for 4 months and cleaned a wound your legion left and sat with him when he was condemned and alone, and he decided I was his and the ward was mine, so the ward is his. That's the whole method. You can't standardize it. You'd have to actually care about the animal every day for months before you needed it, when there was nothing in it for you. That's the part your directorate is going to leave out of the manual, and it's the only part that matters. The directorate left it out of the manual. The manual, when it was published, ran to 200 pages, and it was titled Companion Protocol 1, Discriminate Force Through Bonded Presence, and it codified, in the flat immortal prose of a coalition standard, a set of practices it named with the solemn gravity of a martial culture that has mistaken a farm girl's decency for a combat doctrine. The practice of standing unarmed and calm between the companion and the threat, so that guarding the handler and facing the threat became the same direction, the directorate named the open stance. The single word Ren said every morning at the feeding door and had said at the breach. The directorate could not translate and so entered phonetically. And there is now, in the permanent security doctrine of a 6-species interstellar coalition, a defined tactical term rendered ease, glossed as a de-escalation vocalization establishing baseline calm in a bonded apex companion. And Cyril had watched it enter the record and had laughed until his skin changed 3 colors. Because he was the only one in the room who knew that ease was just what a tired human said to a big animal to mean settle down, everything's fine. And the feeding. The directorate could not standardize the bond, but it could standardize the logistics of the bond, and so the cooler under the desk, the thing Ren had hidden and hauled and paid for out of her own wage against a standing order, became, in the manual's appendix, the sustainment provision. A funded, portioned, species-appropriate ration regimen for the bonded companion, to be maintained by the handler of record and stored within immediate reach of the handler's duty station. Cyril read that line 3 times, stored within immediate reach of the handler's duty station. They had taken the single act that had gotten Ren nearly dismissed, the meat hidden in the footwell where her knees should have gone, and made it doctrine, funded it, mandated it, and the coalition now provisioned at hospitals across its territory a cooler under a desk. Praxis signed the order restoring Sunday to the ward's official ration with an expression that did not change at all, and afterward she told Ren, in Cyril's hearing, the cooler is now a funded fixture of this ward. You may take it out of the footwell and put it in the cold store like a civilized person. I'll keep it under the desk, Ren said. I thought you might, Praxis said, and that was the end of it. The child in the 3rd bed got better. Cyril could not put in his record the exact mechanism, because there was not one, but he could put in the dates, and the dates told a story. Before the raid, Pell had been doing poorly, in the flat clinical sense, her graft knitting on schedule and her spirit not, a child who lay very still and watched a monster in a mirror because the monster was the only thing in her small world that was not being done to her. After the raid, something changed. The monster had a name now, on the record, in permanent coalition prose, and the child had put it there. She had told the security commander the record had better say Sunday saved everyone, and the record did, and Pell had learned at 8 that a small stubborn person insisting on the truth could move an institution, and that lesson does something to a child that no graft can do. She started working at her therapy. The physicians had never been able to get Pell to push at the numb wrongness in her legs, because pushing hurt and pushing was frightening and pushing was one more thing the adults wanted from her body. But Ren made a deal. Wren brought the therapy to the gallery, and while Pell did her hated exercises on the graph frame, she could watch the bay, and on the days she hit her numbers Wren would take her, in a float chair, down the gallery stair, and to the observation window at the level of the bay floor, and the animal would come to the glass, and lie down against it on its side, its enormous eye level with the small Asheny girls, and the two of them would look at each other through the armored pane. The apex predator and the child who had named it, both of them still, and Pell would put her small hand flat against the glass and Sunday would put nothing against it, would just lie there and be looked at. And it was, Cyril wrote in the record he was no longer pretending not to keep, the most therapeutic thing that had ever happened in Recovery Ward 6, and it was not in any manual. Pell moved her toes on the 41st day after the raid. She sat up unaided on the 70th. She stood, holding the graph frame, both legs taking her weight and her whole small face fierce with the effort of it, on the 106th day, which Cyril noted was the same count of days the animal had spent condemned in its bay before the raid, 106, and he did not believe in that kind of symmetry and wrote it down anyway, because it was true, and the true things were what he kept. And Cyril changed too, though he was the last to notice it. It happened by degrees, over the weeks, the way his skin had stopped going pale at the far door and then stopped going pale in the bay, and then, one ordinary afternoon, he realized he was standing inside Bay 9, alone with the animal, because Wren was downring at the butcher's and the shoulder scar needed looking at and there was no one else, and he had simply gone in and done it, knelt on the poured floor and cleaned the seam the Legion's collar had left, the way he had watched Wren do it 100 times. And the animal had turned its great head and looked at him out of one wet slate eye, and then laid it back down and let him work. He came out shaking, but he came out, and the next day he did it again, and by the end of the season Cyril was the ward's second handler of record, the one who fed the animal on Wren's rest days, and the frightened ward tech who had not wanted to be the reason the humming stopped had become, without ever quite deciding to, a person who hummed. "You've changed," Aide told him, unhappily from behind the nurse's rail, where he still stood with the rest of the day's shift, still pale, still nearest to no door. "Yes," Cyril said. "You go in there with it like it's nothing." "It's not nothing," Cyril said. "It's the safest place on the station. I have the record to prove it." He looked at his old colleague, at the whole huddled shift bunched together the way small animals bunch when a shadow crosses the ceiling, exactly as they had bunched on the first morning, and he felt something he had not expected to feel, which was a kind of tired affection for how long it had taken him to stop being one of them. "Come in with me sometime. Slow. You bring the warm brick, I'll do the wound. He likes the warm brick." He almost smiled. "It's just an animal that got told, over and over, by everyone with any authority, that it was a monster, until one person decided to feed it instead. There's a lot of things like that if you look. Most of them just never get a Wren." The story got out, the way stories do, and it did not stay a hospital story for long. It went out first on the tier, in the mouths of the warden Sunday had gone around, and then downring, where a professional crew that had never come back was a matter of considerable interest to everyone in the business the crew had been in, and then, in the slow way of the coalition, up. Somewhere in the security directorate, a 200-page manual with the word ease in it circulated. Somewhere in the Legion a legate told a story at a table that made hard old beast masters go quiet. And somewhere, Cyril supposed, in the wide anxious galaxy that had spent a generation trying to decide what to make of the humans, someone wrote down the thing that everyone who had been in Recovery Ward 6 that day already knew, which was that the coalition had spent 4 months and 3 specialists and 1 auditor and a great deal of money trying to remove a dangerous animal from a hospital, and the thing that had actually solved it in the end was a 22-year-old woman from a farm world who fed it out of a cooler under her desk because a sick child asked her to give it a name. Requests started coming in. That was the part Cyril found hardest to believe. Other convalescent tiers, other stations, Other wards at the edge of coalition space where security ran thin and patients could not run began formally to request a companion. They had read Companion Protocol 1. They wanted, the request said, a bonded apex companion for the protection of immobile patients, per directorate standard, and they wanted to know where they could requisition one, as though you could requisition the thing, as though the thing were the animal and not the 4 months. Praxa answered every request personally, and Cyril kept copies, and the answers were all the same, and they were the closest the overseer ever came to eloquence. There is no requisition, she wrote. You have misread the manual. The protocol does not describe an animal you acquire. It describes a relationship you build over months at cost before you need it, with no guarantee it will ever pay and every likelihood you will be told you are a fool for building it. We did not acquire our companion. We nearly killed it. It was saved by one member of my staff who ignored my own order to do it, at risk to her career and her life, for no reason but that the animal was alive and alone and hers. If you want what we have, that is the price. Most of you will not pay it. That is why most of you will keep requesting an animal, and we will keep telling you there is no requisition, and somewhere a child in a bed on your station will keep watching a monster in a mirror that no one has bothered to name. The animal is never the hard part. The hard part is the girl. Not everyone read the manual. That was how the ward got the occasional reminder of what the whole galaxy had thought before, and what most of it still thought, of the small, calm humans and the lethal, loyal things they kept. A regional health administrator came through on an inspection tour in the 2nd season. A fastidious cell, well-fed species Cyril did not have much patience for, all robes and clipboards, and the particular contempt of a bureaucrat for a facility that had become famous without his permission. He toured the ward with his aides. He reviewed the funded ration line in the budget and made a face. And when he reached the gallery and looked down through the glass at the enormous slate animal lying in the noon light with a small asheny child pressed to the observation window and its eye level with hers, he said to his aides, loudly, in the tone of a man who has found the waste he was looking for, "This is what the directorate has us funding now. A hospital mascot. A pet. They have written 200 pages of doctrine about a station's pet." "I would not say that too loudly," said the man beside him, who was not one of his aides. The administrator turned. The man was old and weathered, and wore the plain, worn leathers of a Legion Beastmaster long retired, and he had come, Cyril would learn on his own credits, a very long way, because a legate had told a story at a table, and he had not been able to stop thinking about it, and he had wanted, before he died, to see with his own eyes the sable that had stepped off the top of the chain of command. He was not looking at the administrator. He was looking through the glass, at the animal, and his old face was doing something complicated. "That is not a pet," the Beastmaster said. "I have handled Sable class for 60 years. I buried the last of my own hand 11 years ago, and I have not been near a Legion animal since, because there was no point. They are all the same animal, and I had said everything I had to say to it. And I came here, an old fool, spending my burial credits on a shuttle, because a legate said a sable had done a thing sables cannot do, and I did not believe her, and I wanted to see the lie for myself." He put one weathered hand flat against the armored glass, low near the child's small one, and below them the great animal turned its head and looked up at the 2 hands on the glass, the child's and the old handler's, and it did not move. It simply received the looking, the way it received everything now, and Cyril watched a 60-year veteran of the most lethal animal husbandry in the coalition stand at the glass of a hospital gallery with his eyes wet. "It is not a lie," the Beastmaster said. "It is real. That animal has retired. It has done the thing my whole cast swears is impossible. It has chosen its own loyalty, and it chose a hospital, and a child, and a girl with a cooler. You are looking at the only free sable in the history of the Border Legions, administrator, and you called it a mascot. And if you say that word again in my hearing, I am going to explain to you, at length, exactly what it was bred to do, and then I am going to ask the girl to open the gallery door." The administrator did not say the word again. He signed off on the ration line. He left early. And Wren, who had watched the whole thing from the aide's desk without a flicker, went back to her manifest. And Cyril, filing it, understood that this was the shape the rest of it would take forever. An endless procession of people who arrived certain the animal was a mascot or a monster or a mistake and left having been shown, quietly, without anyone raising a voice, that it was none of those things and that they had simply not known how to look. He asked her about it once, about the farm world, about why she of all of them had never been afraid. "You want to know why I wasn't scared of Sunday," Wren said. "It was late shift, the ward dim and quiet, the animal a great slow-breathing shape across the floor of the station with its head on her feet." She thought about it in the flat, unhurried way she thought about everything. "Where I grew up, everything that kept us alive could kill us. The draft teams weighed a ton each and they'd put a hoof through your skull if you spooked them, and we hitched them and drove them and slept in the barn with them in the bad winters, because their bodies were the only heat for a kilometer. The dogs that kept the pack hunters off the herds would take a man's arm off if he came at their stock wrong, and we raised them from pups and trusted our children to them. That's just farming. That's just how you live somewhere hard. You don't get to be afraid of the big loyal things because the big loyal things are the only reason you're alive, and the deal is you feed them and you're fair to them and you never, ever lie to them, and in exchange they put themselves between you and the dark." She put her hand on the slate head across her feet. "The whole coalition looked at Sunday and saw a weapon that might go off. I looked at him and saw a work animal nobody had been fair to yet. That's not bravery. That's just knowing what he was. Your people never had to live somewhere the loyal things were also the lethal things. Mine did. That's the only difference. That's the whole of what makes us frightening to you, I think, in the end. It was never that we're dangerous. It's that we're not afraid of the dangerous things, because we grew up loving them." Pell walked to the bay on her own legs on the 200th day. It had been coming for weeks. The graft had taken. The therapy had done what therapy does when a child finally decides to fight her own body instead of surrendering to it, and the physicians had cleared her for short supervised walks along the long ward, hand on the rail, an aide at her elbow. She had used every one of those walks for the same destination. She would not walk to the window that showed the shuttles, though she had loved that window once. She would not walk to the day room. She walked every time, slow and fierce and unsteady, the length of the long ward to the gallery stair and down it, one careful step at a time, to the observation window at the level of the bay floor. And there she would stop, breathing hard, triumphant, and put her hand flat on the glass and wait. On the 200th day she walked it without a hand on the rail and without an aide at her elbow, though Wren walked a half step behind her the whole way with her arms not quite out, the way you follow a child who has told you fiercely that she does not need following. Pell reached the window. She put her hand on the glass. And below, the animal that had spent a season learning her small silhouette rose from the center of the noonbright bay and crossed to the glass, and lay down against it on its side, its enormous eye level with hers. And the child and the sable looked at each other through the armored pane, both of them still. And Pell said to the animal, in the clear carrying voice of a child announcing an accomplishment to the one person whose opinion counts, "I walked." The animal breathed. It did not do anything a manual could record. But Cyril, who was on the stair, and Wren, who was a half step behind, both saw the great slate tail move once slow across the poured floor, the way it moved perhaps once a week when the mood took it and the light was good. And Pell laughed, delighted, and put her forehead against the glass. And the two of them stayed like that, the child who had learned to walk and the animal that had been condemned to die, until Pell's legs began to shake and Wren gathered her up. And even then the child kept her hand on the glass as long as her arm could reach, and the animal watched her go. Pell's mother came off the ore runs for the discharge, and she was a hard, tired Asheny who had missed most of her daughter's year in this ward and knew it. And she stood in the gallery looking down at the animal her child would not stop talking about with her skin, the pale blue of a mother, who has just understood that a Class 9 predator has been part of her absent child's life for a season. And she turned on Ren with all the fear and guilt and helplessness of a parent who was not there. And she said, "You let my daughter near that thing." "Yes," Ren said. "It's a war animal. It killed a man." "It killed 2 men and a professional crew," Ren said, evenly, "all of whom came here to hurt the patients in this ward, and one of whom had his hand on the vent control of a room full of children like your daughter, and every one of those children is alive because of it. Your daughter was never once in danger from Sunday. Your daughter was in danger from the men Sunday stopped. There's a difference, and I know it's hard to see from a mining run 4 seasons away, but it's the most important difference there is, so I'm going to make sure you see it before you take her home." She turned the mother to the glass gently. "Look at how it looks at her. You've been afraid all the way here that you left your child alone. You didn't. She wasn't alone. She had the whole ward, and she had me. And on the nights when the graft hurt and I'd gone home and the physicians frightened her, she had that. Something that lay against the glass and let an 8-year-old feel like the bravest person on the station because she wasn't afraid of the monster. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm going to tell you your daughter is walking, and part of the reason she's walking is down there in that bay. And when she's grown, she is going to tell this story her whole life, the story of the year she made friends with a monster nobody else would name, and it is going to be the story that tells her she can do hard things. That's what your daughter got in the year you couldn't be here. Be angry if you need to, but look first." The mother looked. She looked for a long time. And when Pell was discharged, walking 3 days later, her mother stopped at the aide's desk on the way out, at the battered console with the thermal cloth curtaining the footwell. And she did not say thank you, because some things are too big for the word, but she reached down, and she pulled the thermal cloth aside, and she looked at the cooler in the footwell full of neatly portioned meat, the thing that had started all of it, and she took a credit chip out of her work vest and set it on top of the cooler. A season's hard wages from an ore run, for the feeding of the animal that had kept her daughter company while she could not, and then she took her walking child by the hand and went home. Ren kept the chip. She did not spend it. She had it drilled and put on a cord, and she hung it inside the footwell over the cooler, where she would see it every time she reached for a packet, and Cyril asked her once what it was, and she said, "Receipt," and did not explain, and he understood anyway. The ward changed after that. Not all at once. But the requests kept coming, and Praxa kept refusing to pretend the animal was a requisition, and slowly Recovery Ward 6 became something it had not set out to become, which was the place the coalition sent the cases no one else would take. They came in 1s and 2s over the following seasons. A blinded courier beast from a wrecked freighter that had savaged 3 rescue workers and been marked for destruction, which turned out, once someone sat with it in the dark for a month and learned its language of scent and sound, to have been not savage but terrified, defending the cargo hold that was the last place that smelled like its dead handler. A coalition scout hound gone silent and dangerous after its unit was lost, which no kennel would touch, and which spent its first 3 weeks in Recovery Ward 6 lying against the bay glass beside Sunday, learning from the older animal how to be a thing at rest. A pair of orphaned pack young from a border world, condemned as unsocializable, which Cyril raised himself, on Ren's method, feeding them out of a second cooler he installed under his own duty station without asking anyone, because there was doctrine for that now, the sustainment provision, stored within immediate reach of the handler's duty station, and he cited it deadpan when the quartermaster complained. None of it was in the manual, all of it was in Cyril's record. And every hard case that came through those doors was met, now, not with a lattice or a schedule or an auditor, but with a small human or a converted Ashini who knelt down slow and put out a hand, and started, on the first day, the long unglamorous work of being fair to a thing that no one had ever been fair to in the flat certain knowledge, learned once and never unlearned, that the animal was never the hard part. The coalition tried once to give the animal a medal. Cyril did not think it was possible to make Wren angry, but the citation came close. It arrived in the second season, a formal instrument from the coalition's honors directorate, and it proposed to recognize the specimen. It still said specimen in the honors directorate, because no one there had read the inquiry for meritorious defense of coalition civilians, and it proposed to do so at a ceremony, on the tier concourse, with a delegation and a band and a physical decoration to be affixed to the animal. And it requested that the handler present the animal in a controlled posture for the affixing of the decoration by a dignitary. "No," Wren said, reading it, "affixing. They want to pin a thing on him in front of a band." "It is an honor," Aide offered. "It's a parade," Wren said. He spent 4 months in a sealed room being called a monster, and 3 weeks being scheduled for gassing. And now that it turns out he's a hero, they want to march him out on the concourse and pin metal on him so a dignitary can be photographed next to the coalition's famous animal. He's not a prop. He was a prop for the Legion his whole life, an asset, a thing you point at a war, and the entire point of what happened here is that he stopped being that, and I am not going to hand him back to the same instinct in a nicer uniform. She set the citation down. "Tell them no ceremony. Tell them if the coalition wants to honor him, it can fund the ration line at every convalescent tier that asks, and stop pretending the manual is a requisition. That's an honor a hero can use. The medal they can keep." They did not keep the medal. Institutions are stubborn, and the honors directorate could not process a hero who declined to be honored, and so a compromise was reached that was, Cyril thought, the most human thing about the whole affair, because it had Wren's fingerprints on it. There would be no ceremony and no band and no affixing. Instead, the coalition would strike a citation into the permanent record in prose, where it could not be photographed, and the citation would name the animal not by its specimen designation, and not by any grand marshal title, but by the only name it had ever answered to, entered formally forever, into the honors of a 6-species interstellar coalition. Sunday, resident companion, Cassier Reach. Cyril copied that into his record too. He had a growing collection now of official documents that had been quietly bent, by one small stubborn human, out of the shape institutions wanted and into the shape the truth needed, and the citation was his favorite, because somewhere in a coalition archive, between the honors of admirals and the commendations of fleets, there is a line that reads simply Sunday, and a farm girl put it there, and made a war culture's honors directorate agree that a day of rest was a fit name for a hero. The dignitaries came anyway. That was the part no one could stop. Word that the famous animal would receive no ceremony only made the famous animal more interesting, and over the following seasons, a slow trickle of the coalition's important people found reasons to root through Cassier Reach and ask, casually, whether they might see it. Most of them Praxa turned away, and after Praxa, the overseer who followed her, a careful Ashini who had learned the ward's ways. But some got through on rank, and they would come to the gallery expecting the coalition's war hero, expecting a snarling legend, a monster at rest, and they would look down through the armored glass and find in the noonbright bay an aging slate animal lying with its head on its paws watching a small gray door, entirely unremarkable, entirely at ease, and Cyril would watch the disappointment cross their faces, and then, if they were the kind of person worth anything at all, the slow dawning of the actual thing, which was stranger and larger than the legend. "It's just lying there," a fleet admiral said once at the glass, plainly let down. "I was told it was the most dangerous animal in the coalition." "It is," Cyril said. "That's why it can lie there. The dangerous ones that have to prove it aren't dangerous. They're frightened. That one has nothing left to prove to anyone, so it rests. You are looking at the safest-looking lethal thing in known space, Admiral, and the reason it looks safe is that it is, to everyone in this ward, and the reason it is lethal is that it is not, to anyone who comes for us. Both at once. That is the whole of it. Your people find that combination unbearable, I have noticed. You want your dangerous things to look dangerous, and your safe things to look safe. We keep ours in one animal and let it nap. He had learned over the seasons to talk like this to admirals, dry and unhurried, the human way, and he had learned that it worked, that the calm, unbothered delivery did more to a visitor than any snarl through glass, and he understood that he had caught it from Wren. The whole method, the way you catch a way of standing from someone you have watched stand a long time. The admiral looked at the sleeping animal a while longer. Humanity gave you this, she said finally. It was not quite a question. Humanity brought us the girl, Cyril said. The animal was already ours, condemned in a bay, waiting to be gassed. The girl just would not let us kill it. That is the thing your fleets keep trying to name and cannot. It was never that the humans are stronger than us, admiral, or fiercer, or that they sent us weapons. They did not send us weapons. They sent us one 22-year-old who would not stop feeding a monster nobody else would name, and it turned out that was worth more than a fleet, and none of us saw it coming, because none of us would have paid the price she paid before there was anything to gain from it. He watched the animal breathe. That is the whole of what unsettles you about them, if you want it in one sentence. It is not their reach. It is that they will love a lethal thing all the way through the part where everyone tells them they are fools, and then the lethal thing is theirs, and it was never going to be yours because you would have created it. The admiral did not have an answer for that. Cyril had noticed they rarely did. She looked at the animal a while longer, and then she went, and left the ration line funded for another cycle, which was, in the end, the only tribute the ward had ever asked. Voss Karam came back one more time, a year and a half after the raid, and he came to say goodbye, though he did not say so, because his caste did not say so. He was older. Cyril saw it the moment he came off the shuttle, the crest gone gray at the roots, the scarred forearms thinner. He had left the Legion, Cyril would learn, not long after the inquiry. He had certified an animal unbreakable and a girl unteachable, and had found at the end of 40 years that he no longer had the stomach for the work that came after such certifications, which was the crating and the shipping and the reminding. He had spent the intervening seasons doing nothing in particular, which for a man like Karam was its own kind of wound, and then he had booked a shuttle to Cassiar Reach, on his own credits, the way the old beast master had, because there was one animal left in the coalition he wanted to see before he was done seeing things. He did not go to the gallery. He asked Wren formally, the way one professional asks another, whether he might enter the bay. And Wren looked at him for a moment, and then she did the thing that told Cyril how far the whole world had turned, the thing that no one on Cassiar Reach would have imagined on that first pale morning at the rail. She said yes, and she did not go in with him. She let him go in alone. Cyril watched from the stair, because someone always watched from the stair, and he watched the reclamation specialist of the Border Legions walk into a bright bay unarmed, without a lattice, without a collar, an old man in worn leathers, and cross to the center of the room where the great slate animal lay in the noon light with its head on its paws, and lower himself down, slow, onto the poured floor beside it, his old joints protesting, until he was sitting on the ground, next to the thing he had once been sent to destroy. And the animal lifted its head and looked at him out of one wet slate eye, the eye that had refused his lattice, that had flowed around his injector for 20 minutes, that had declined him with such perfect economy, and Cyril braced, out of old habit, and there was nothing to brace for. The animal looked at the old man for a long moment. And then it laid its head down again, and shifted, and put its great chin across Karam's knee, the way it did once a week when the mood took it and the light was good, and let its weight rest there. And Karam, the hardest man Cyril had ever stood next to, sat on the floor of a hospital bay with the head of a Border Legion sable in his lap, and put one weathered hand on the slate hide between its ears, and did not move for a very long time. When he came out his eyes were dry, and his face was at peace in a way Cyril had not seen on it before. "It forgave me," Karam said. He seemed to need to say it to someone, and Cyril was there. "I do not know why it should, and I do not deserve it, and it did it anyway. I came to reclaim it and crate it and ship it to its death, and I sat down next to it just now, and it put its head in my lap." He shook his own head slowly. 40 years I spent making these animals fear me and serve me, and I thought that was mastery, and it was not. It was just fear. And here at the end, an animal I failed to command has taught me the difference by forgiving me for trying. Your aide was right about everything. Tell her when she is old that a stupid old soldier came a long way to sit on the floor with her animal and understood, 40 years too late, that he had spent his whole life being feared by things that would rather have been loved. He gathered his worn leathers around himself. "I will not come again. There is no need. I have seen the free sable. I can be done now." And he went, and he did not come again. And when word reached the ward 2 years later that Vas Karam had died quietly at a great age, on a small world with no legion on it, Wren went up to the gallery alone that night and sat a while with the animal, and did not say what she said, and came down again, and that was how the ward grieved him. Praxa retired the same season Karam last visited. She had said she would, on the day she stopped the gassing. She had said she wanted, before she retired, to know exactly how badly she had been robbed, and by then she knew, to the credit, the auditor having peeled Hark's whole operation open, and the dispensary that no one had reconciled for 3 years having given up all its quiet theft. She had run Recovery Ward 6 for 30 years, and she left it in an afternoon, with the same flat, unhurried lack of ceremony she had brought to everything. And the only thing she did that was not strictly procedural was, on her last day, to decline the honor the tier wished to pay her. They had wanted to name the ward's new protective doctrine after her, the local standing orders that had grown up around Sunday and the hard cases, the ward's own practices that had gone further than any directorate manual. The Praxa Protocol, they wanted to call it. She refused. "You will not put my name on it," she told the tier committee in Cyril's hearing, folding her hands. "I did not build it, I nearly gassed it. The single decision of my 30 years that this ward will remember is the one where I chose, for 4 days, to be an instrument of a schedule instead of a supervisor of a hospital, and I was talked out of it, at the last, by a specialist and an auditor and a farm girl with a slate, and if I had been left to my own judgment, the animal that saved 4 wards would have stopped breathing on a Tuesday to close a paperwork error." She was silent a moment. "You want to honor something, honor the thing that actually held when everything I was responsible for failed. Name it after the girl, or better, do not name it after anyone. Name it after what it is." She looked at the committee. "Call it the standing order, because that is what she did." She stood in the open between the animal and the world, and she said the animal was not to be given up, and she did not move, and she made all of us stand with her. That is the whole doctrine. A person who will not move. You do not need my name on that. You need to remember that it is harder than it sounds, and that when it mattered I could not do it and she could. They named it the standing order. It is, Cyril is told, taught now at 3 coalition medical academies, and there is a line in it near the front that reads the handler stands in the open so that guarding and facing become one direction, and no one who learns it knows that it started with a small human kneeling in smoke at a broken door, and Cyril has decided that is all right. The best things lose their origins. That is how you know they have become true for everyone, and not just for the people who were there. He was there, he keeps the record. That is his part, and he has made his peace with it. The ward is quiet tonight. It is late shift. The healing panels dim to their evening amber, 40 patients breathing their 40 measured breaths, and Cyril is at the nurse's station finishing the log, the real one, the one he no longer pretends not to keep. Down the length of the long ward the beds are full, and the monitors are steady in the corridor at the far end, the one the whole ward once rearranged itself to avoid, the one no maintenance crew would pass. is the warmest part of the station now, because that is where the bay is, and the bay door stands open in the evenings, and the animal comes and goes as it likes, and the patients ask for it by name. At the mouth of the ward, at a battered aide's desk, Wren is finishing her own shift. She is older now a little, the way people get older without any single day being the day it happened. Still small, still plain, still with a face you would forget in a transit queue, and then, having once known the story behind it, never forget again. She has pulled the thermal cloth aside from the footwell out of pure habit, though there is no need to hide anything anymore, and the cooler hums there in the open, funded, official, doctrine, with a drilled credit chip on a cord hanging over it, and she reaches in and takes out a packet and opens it, unhurried, and sets it down on the floor. The animal is asleep across her feet. It sleeps most evenings now, the great slate head heavy on the tops of her boots, the ridged back rising and falling slow as tide, an old campaigner at rest in the one place it chose, out of the whole lethal galaxy, to lay its loyalty down. It does not stir for the food. It will eat when it wakes. It has learned, at last, in a hospital at the far edge of coalition space, the one thing 40 generations of breeding could not teach it and one farm girl with a cooler could, which is that the food will be there, and the door is open, and no one is going to take any of it away. There is a new aide on the ward tonight, a young Asheny on her first rotation, and she is standing at the nurse's rail exactly where Sarah once stood, her skin the pale, curdled blue of a person who cannot believe what she is seeing, watching the small human at the desk with the enormous predator asleep across her feet, and she whispers to Sarah, the way Aide once whispered to him, "Is that safe?" Sarah looks at the woman and the animal at the mouth of the ward, the calm human and the sleeping monster and the open cooler between them in the amber light, and he thinks about a schedule, and a lattice, and 6 failed beastmasters, and a word in a manual spelled ease, and a child who learned to walk, and an old soldier forgiven on the floor of a bay. And the whole long turning of the world that began the morning, a tray was still warm, and one human carried it down a corridor, everyone else pretended was not there. "It's the safest place on the station," he tells the new aide. "I have the record to prove it. Come in with me tomorrow, slow. Bring the warm brick." He goes back to his log. Down the ward at her desk in the open, Wren Calloway settles into the chair that has never fit her and rests one hand on the sleeping animal's head and begins very softly to hum.